the mayor started out talking there, is this is an opportunity. We are not going to create a plan tonight. We're going to try and establish how we want to do that going forward. My hope is to get some interim kind of goals and direction from you, especially as it relates to budget, as we head into this budget, so that a plan is great. Your budget has to reflect that plan, otherwise they're just doesn't
Great
work.
ideas.
And then I know the mayor wanted to talk in just a little bit about city meeting processes. There's some things going on at the legislature we wanted to chat about. And then we do have a time in here for you just to talk. So my goal is trying to be done by 8. You can go to 9 if we want. So with that.
6:30.
With that.
But if Sherry conducts, we might be done by 6:30.
That's right.
So there we go. I should have clicked it, set up the process, some high level, and then that. So I should have clicked it. So one of the things, having done this for 20 plus years, strategic plans, there's 2 times they fail. One, you create it, it sits on your shelf, and it holds all your other books up because you never look at it. It's just thick enough to do that. But usually they take a long time. You hire a consultant, they come in, you walk through the process that sometimes you're frustrated because you feel like you already know this information. But a lot of times it just takes a long time. I'm thinking of some of the ones I've worked on that have been 3 to 5 years. By the time you're done, the key people who were putting it together have all left. The councils have switched over, and you're like, it's not really addressing the need. Our challenge here is that not only do we have the internal kind of staff, but our community is changing so rapidly that by the time we go through one of those traditional processes, it will be obsolete a year before we're done. Right? We have to come up with something more agile. And I've used that phrase because I can't think of another one. It's not to be flexible, but you have a plan and it needs to be able to shift. And we have to come up with a process that allows frequent checkbacks with the council to decide, is this making a difference? Because one of the worst things that happens is you create a plan, you come up with some proxies you're gonna measure, and then you start pulling levers. So think of SB 34. The state is pulling all sorts of levers on affordable housing. They're doubling down on those levers. And since 2019, they've done absolutely nothing. So instead of stepping back and saying, what should we do different? We're just gonna double down, we're gonna pull the levers harder. What we want to avoid is doing that. If we're pulling levers and it's not making a difference, well, let's all call time out and say, what's a different lever what's something else we should try? I always believe in trying to find the effective approach first before you work on efficiency, because there's nothing worse than having a team that's incredibly efficient at doing something that's absolutely worthless. They're super good at it, it just doesn't do anything. So my take right now is we need to do this differently, and I don't think that means a consultant. And the staff capacity, my hope is, and through this next budget, is to carve out some capacity in some of our high-level staff so we can assign somebody this, and then as a team, working with council, come up with a plan that works for Harriman. It's not going to be the 6-inch thick with all the cool color maps, right? That's our general plan. It's taken 5 years. We'll still have that map. It'll be great. John can come up with some cool graphics for whatever we do come up with if we really need that. But I view this kind of as an iterative, very back and forth process with council. So I've not done it that way before, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think, oh, maybe we should focus this. And then we get a staff report coming in that's going to affect that already, and I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna have to be pretty quick to come up with something. So my initial thought is, again, to keep it in-house and probably try and hire somebody to free up some capacity. I wouldn't hire somebody specifically to do this, but free up some capacity so that people can work on it. So we can come back and report. At a minimum, it would be annually, but probably every 6 months, we would at least have a work meeting to sit down real quick and say, is it still meeting the need? is it making a difference? Or have things changed in this community? Because that's the part that I worry about the most. I think we can come up with things and start doing it, but with growth or other challenges will come up that we need to step back and say, okay, now how do we deal with this to keep going? So that's my first thought. So I'm really open to, so Tammy and I think it would be Tammy and her communications team that probably takes the heavy lift on this. My time, and then pretty much everybody's gonna have to be involved. And I would see it actually two parts, this really strategic and then maybe more of a tactical piece. This is what we're trying to do right now in the next 6 months to see if we can adjust this strategy, and that's where that kind of that frequent check-in and moving back and forth with council. So that's that. I'll let you guys kind of tell me what you think or direction if there's something, and then I think that's the next ones.
I think that because I thought this a lot with our general plan too, that if you were coming in right now and we're a brand new city and you had a blank canvas and you could go, I think you needed to go with a more traditional strategic plan setting. And I said the same thing with our general plan. It's like we don't have a blank canvas. Let's just tweak it where we need to tweak it. Here, I think it has to be more than tweaking, because I really, truly, we just don't have a strategic plan that I had ever felt that we were part of. And so, I think you have to do it exactly like you're saying. You have to come in, get started, get the ball rolling somewhere, and get some good, framework behind it, and then we just have to make changes as we go. I agree 100%.
Absolutely. You and I talked, that's what we're.
Yeah, we were talking about
Yep.
Some of you I know work in industries where there's, you set strategic direction. The hard part I find in cities is we're not manufacturing something, so you can't say, here's our market, and here's how we're doing, and here's our cost. We're providing parks, we're gonna do this, so it is often different for us.
Okay, and I don't want to be in any way contrary to the spirit of what you said at the beginning here, Mayor Palmer, but no, I think this is in the spirit of what you're saying, but there are aspects, or I would say, yet to be fully vetted aspects of past decisions that are just hanging out in the ether that keep jumping up and derailing what limited strategic plans we have developed. It's really hard to come up with a long-term budget, capital plan, when all of a sudden you say, okay, next year we're gonna get these 4 capital projects done, and there's some general obligation thing that's a reimbursement from an MDA from 15 years ago that nobody knew about that takes $3 million out of the general fund. And I would suggest that at least at a high level, I think it's really important that we understand, we have a great understanding of the current obligations of the city, and Alan is a wizard and a juggler at the same time. But I don't know that we have a clear understanding of the traps and the bombs and the I don't know, that's probably a mischaracterization of everything. Just say the unknowns that are out there that could derail our plans, that have claim on the future resources of the city, that derail our plans to do something else with that money. And so understanding where we are in reality is a really key point of understanding where we might go and what decisions we might make. I think the first thing is figuring out, how do we meet the obligations we already have before we figure out how we're gonna pay for all the other stuff that are still obligations but might be down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to do exactly what we're saying. That's because we have this plan, but it's gonna have to be pretty fluid, because we constantly have these other things that keep popping up and saying, oh, by the way, 25 years ago.
We made a promise someplace. I think that's the thing that is the scariest, is that things we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden it's like we found one yesterday, with an agreement that we called called actually, I don't know what their name is, but Ryan Button was telling us. We called them when they built Advantage Arts. Hey, we need this path, we need it right now. And so they went out and built it with the understanding that we'd pay them back. It was 3 years, they go, we're wondering where that reimbursement is. Everybody's here going, okay. What funds were we gonna use? It was one of those, we'll deal with it later. Well, later's here, so we're gonna deal with it in our budget. But it's those kinds of things that I think concern that you're talking about. So
Yeah.
I think part of this really has to be, what's our baseline? What do we know and have some flexibility, because there are gonna be things that, and this is not a knock on Jackie, cause this all happened before her, but our early record keeping is pretty pathetic.
Which is why we.
It's, at one point, we're just all gonna go out to Butterfield as a whole group and just dig through those files one of these days, cause
It's really fun.
I just think we have to, cause I'm like, I have no idea.
Sounds like.
I'm used to having,
Some
you know, if the
PTO.
city's 150 years old and you're trying to find something from its earliest days, yeah, it's a long time. We're 20 years old. Frankly, everything should have been on computer, so it should all be typed.
Yeah.
It should be easy to find.
Jackie laughing.
No, Steve, not
And I
to,
know she is.
and I completely get where you're coming
Yeah.
from, but and that's where I think this is more critical than ever, because those are gonna come up.
Yeah.
And I don't think these visions or goals need to be just financial in nature, it's more, where do we as a council see this? What is our vision for this city, so that we can, I remember our planning commission, that was our biggest thing, was Michael Malloy always preached, developers are coming to us, telling us what they want, because we're not giving them a vision for our city. And so that's where, so I don't necessarily think it's just in capital projects, it's what's our vision, because we will have money for parks, we will have money for some field at some point, or for some facilities, that money will be there based on some impact fees and stuff, so it's not just major projects, but what can we tell our developers if there's open space in a project? What do we want to tell Olympia that we want to see some of those open spaces look like? What do we tell, some of these Laguna Malibu projects but what's our vision? That's what I think not necessarily where do we spend the money, because those mine funds are gonna come up, but if those detour us, instead of, we better, you know what I mean, as long as we still have a goal at the end, I think those mines are gonna come up.
Yeah.
But I think we still wanna have it might vary us a little bit, but, does that make sense, or we?
It just, and again, where do we start is, I think more semantics than everything else. It's just a budget discussion is part of what we're gonna be covering tonight. And I think it's just important to kind of identify where we are, so that we might have a choice in where we go. And I think that means with a lot of things, right? Like Sherry was pointing out, if it's a blank canvas and we have all these opportunities, well, then there's a whole lot of decisions we have to make. But if there's not a very blank canvas and is largely filled in, there's only a few things, then let's focus on those areas that we may have some choices and identify kind of what our priorities in those areas might be. The rest, we're kind of have to say, well, those were set before we got here and we're gonna just have to live with those, Does that make sense? I mean, we could say, well, we wanna have grand parks and pavilions and, all kinds of stuff. Well, there's only so many places we can do that. So, do we want those? Where do we want them? Those are kind of things, maybe that gets a little too tactical, but, at least from a strategic standpoint, understanding what are the goals for that? Amenities and parks, what are the, goals for providing public services and how we're gonna manage those things? What are the goals for, fiscal responsibility in the city? What are the priorities in terms of projects? Is it fixing old roads or building new roads? How do we determine that? And that's a bazillion questions, but I think that those are things that at least this meeting probably has to answer at least some of those questions, or try to answer some of those questions.
What's your next slide?
See?
But I
Stealing your
think
thunder.
one of the things we'll do with any of these processes, and like I said, we don't have to do it tonight, because it usually takes a little bit back and forth. What is the vision? We have multiple vision statements that are the city. They're not the same. And a vision or any of that stuff can be super pie in the sky and fluffy that you can Dilbert.com used to have one that you would go out and create it for you, your mission vision statements. You could just press it and it would create one, throwing all the buzzwords in. You do that, or you can really think about, here's what we're gonna do, and I think you have to look in, what are your constraints?
Right.
You know, I really would rather not have a vision that talks anything about live play or whatever, because
Work play.
every single city I've worked for has that in it, and I really am hoping at some point in my career to work for a city that doesn't use that phrase. Because I think that some of that's understand, yes, we want you to live here, we're a city, right? If we're a city of industry, California, no, we just want to be the industry, but it's one of those, it's a pet peeve, because it's so cliche, it doesn't tell you anything. So if that's it, what we'll do as part of this budget is we're gonna try and put some resources in so we can actually start and have that kind of process. I don't think it needs, again, to do a true, the old way with a consultant, you're probably spending $150,000 to bring them in and have them, and they do all this stuff. I don't know what it will cost, we'll look at kind of that staffing structure, but the problem with that consultant is you'll get it, it'll be still there, and the first 6 months is fine, a year it's starting to be stale, by year 3 it's obsolete, and in their process, it takes them 5 years to do it, so it's just old information, so that will be our first kind of piece to do that, and that having a strategy and then those tactics are really gonna come up as part of your budget. Okay, we're doing this, here's where staff's moving, council gets to say, we like that, tweak it, go this way, that way, and that helps us know when things come in that are not part of our plan, how to start filtering those and say, okay, this fits this, and we bring it to you, and in our budget, I would hope eventually that all this vision and goals, they all tie through. You can see in the budget, we're doing this because this is your goal, right? And we can tell our people in the field, you're doing this because it moves the needle on this goal. And that's what we're trying to do as a community. So that can take a little while, getting that buy-in. But I think creating and getting moving on a plan, we can do a little bit faster.
So yeah, would be my question is what is the goal? A strategic plan sounds good, but so far I haven't heard anything about a plan. Just kind of nebulous.
Well,
Throw more money at something and really, I mean, hiring more people is an ongoing increasing item. It's not a one-time consulting, it's every year, and then as we have inflation costs, et cetera, so I would want, my question in kind of reading the material and listening to the discussion so far would be, what's the goal? What does a strategic plan mean? I mean, personally, I hate the word vision.
Yeah.
Because that changes every 2 years. Right? Like vision means nothing to me. Like what is the goal of the plan? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? I don't know. I mean, the second part of this budget priorities to me, that's what we're supposed to do, is make sure we're delivering services as efficiently as possible.
So, just using other experience, a vision, like I said, it can be super fluffy and it doesn't accomplish anything other than it makes people feel good.
Or it's just frustrating because I read those vision and mission statements and like we never follow them. It's like it's like the wording in the general plan. Like it means almost nothing.
So the idea would be to create, and I don't know, I think you might have been outside when we were talking about this, a plan that we can adopt quickly, that you have to set some goals. So part of this will be, and that wasn't necessarily the plan tonight, I need to make sure you're okay with this process. So bring you together, so I would start thinking, what are your goals? What do you see the community being? Right? You're the council, you're the elected officials, so you'll have to come to a consensus amongst yourselves on what that is. So it could be parks, it could be
Can I start
arts.
with something?
Yeah.
Like, listen, I'm just gonna throw out some things, and these are points for debate, right? Not necessarily my consent. I think that we should have a city that's mostly of residents, not renters. I think that we should have a city that is not necessarily live, work, play, but a place where people love to live, where there are places where people can work here. There are employment centers, there are businesses, there are, I'd love to see innovative businesses, things that are, going to carry the city forward, not be millstones around our neck into the past. I'd like to see, our city be beautiful, a place where people have pride in the city and, what it looks like and how it functions. I'd like our city to be clean. I'd like our city to be efficient. I'd like it to work well, including, transportation and traffic and, I'd like there to be sufficient services and amenities to meet the needs of a large percentage of the population here. I mean, we don't live in a bubble, so some things are provided by neighboring communities. I'd love to see us have a mix of housing that serves the entire spectrum of incomes. I think that we should have a definition of that build out our city would have ideally a certain percentage of certain housing types or certain market segmentations. I'm spitballing here, but those are to me strategic vision type of things, right? We're trying to define what do we want the city to look like? How do we want the city to be? What are the goals of the city? And then we're gonna have to look at the constraints on those goals placed on us by resources, finances, budgetary obligations, things like that. I don't know, but
And I would say in these that you shouldn't be afraid of making, as Jim call it, that big, hairy, audacious goal, something it's not a one-term budget. This is
right.
a 5 to 10 year thing you have to just work at to
Yeah,
get.
like, one of the things that I really, firmly believe has to be a part of what our strategic plan is, I think we need to be a smart city. I think we need to look at investing in infrastructure like broadband and what that means for our community now and in the future. Is that a mechanism for not only cost savings and efficiencies and improvements of services, but it is also an ability to attract businesses and transportation services and, all those kind of things. How and when and how fast and how it gets paid, that's all a different discussion, but am I on the ballpark of what you guys are looking for? Am I?
I would say that's generally, so if that, council will have that kind of high level, you'll pick where you wanna be, and then the part underneath, the goals that you're gonna see in a biennial budget are more of those tactical, okay, if we want, transportation to be efficient, then you should see plans that are trying to address those areas, so your constituents say, yes, I see an improvement. If it's places for employment, from the general plan through, do we have places for that? Are we doing things that encourage, discourage, and work through some goals that how to do that? If we can't do incentives, what else is there that the city does to encourage that? So, yeah, I think those are the kinds of things that if we sat down for 2 hours and just the council spitball what they want the community to look like, and then we come back with something that says, here's what we think we heard you say, and here are those goals, then you can say, yes. And we start running and trying to do them. Again, the hard part is, I think if we go through a standard when we're gonna adopt it, it'll take a couple years to adopt it, and then we'll get those goals, and the stuff we're trying to do is already done, right? Somebody's already built on there, and so we can't direct it. I think that's the challenge I see with our general plan, is that we're planning for things that are already, they have engineers drawing things for them, so it's not, we're gonna be late to the game. So does that answer kind of what, so my thought tonight.
Not really. It's just it's frustrating to me after 6 years of having many of these conversations, that they all seem to kind of be the same, but I actually think that it is a money thing, it is a budget thing, where Steve started out. It's, alright, how many complaints have we gotten just in the last 2 weeks about road conditions, not efficiency, not traffic jams, but the roads are
Potholes,
terrible
yeah.
and need to be fixed. Secondary water, how many people don't have secondary water, right? It cost me a fortune to water my lawn. I mean, what are the basic services that people expect should be part, that for the city to provide? Law enforcement. I think we have to start with those things and have a strategic plan, but to me, it starts with the budget where is the money? What obligations do we have? What are the things that are most important to catch up on, right? And here's the funds that can use for those, and there's other things that, they are new projects but most of those things are, I feel like it's the general plan all over again. They're already decided to a large degree, right? So I think we need more of a financial roadmap of here's what we can control and what we can't. And here's the basic services that people expect. Let's make sure we take care of those first. If you're looking for priorities, for me, that's gonna be the answer every single time. Let's get the roads fixed. Let's get the water system fixed. Let's do those basic things that we need to do. And go from there. Talking about vision and what we want, what would be nice in our parks and what would, to me, those are kind of the fluffy things that it's a great conversation to have, but at least for me at this point, having had many of those conversations, we're still missing the mark on the basic stuff.
That's a fair point. I think that's usually, they're all supposed to flow together. So if we've been
Right.
talking these, but building a budget over here without that, then there's your disconnect.
So I like the idea of what we've been talking about prior to this of, we need to have like a longer term budget, right, to take care of those things. I think that's, to me, that's where you start. I just always cringe when I see more staffing, let's throw more money at it. Like, it says right here, right, strategic plans are essential for success, however, it's easy for the plan itself to become the end and not the means to an end. What's the end?
That's what you have to.
Right, if you don't.
We have
Yeah, if the idea is, if the only goal is to build the plan, then yeah, that's worth it.
So here's kind of my overall point with that. If it's a vision question, we will go round in circles for years and years and years, because that's what that conversation is. It needs to be quantifiable, right? Not just an idea, or it would be nice, but a quantifiable goal. If that makes sense.
And you have to.
Otherwise, exactly what you wrote is the case. The plan is the end, not the end with the plan to
But
get there.
I would say I think we can do both simultaneously, if you will.
And
like,
you have to
if
talk
the-
about
if
the
the-
future, but if we're
right,
just talking
if the-
about
if
the
the-
fluffy stuff without the
Well,
nuts and
no,
bolts.
I don't think it's fluffy stuff to say, we want roads in good repair throughout every part of the city. I think that's a strategic thing. I mean, that's the
That
thing.
can be quantified.
Right, then we can break that down into quantifiable bits, right? I think we want, clean air, clean water, safe neighborhoods, roads that function, and I think by and large, we do a good job of that. The city functions pretty well in those areas.
Depends on where you live.
Sure.
My road sucks
Yeah,
and has for ever since I've lived there, so I guess it depends on where you live.
So
And the roads in my area keep getting budgeted and then bumped, so I think it depends on where you live.
So one of this might even be what we're trying to do is have that financial, one of the part of the street plan is to have a financial plan, how to accomplish things and to live with it. We're working on a 5-year, probably 6-year capital plan, right, so we can lay things out. We're having a meeting on that tomorrow. Trying to identify those things we've already committed and signed contracts on. Trying to go through everybody's drawer and find out how many emails came through that said we were doing this, so we know most of that. So I think that'll be part of this, right? You have to have a plan, and the
need a map
interim.
of the minefield.
I think there's another part of that too, and I think this goes with what Jared and Sherry are saying, is that it's not only, there's obligations that we're already behind on. we have to fix these roads. They've got to get done. But when we don't have impact fees for them, and we don't have anything else, these are, general revenue discretionary type of projects. But all the discretionary revenue gets sucked up in all of the other commitments that have been made that we don't even know about. So, we start early planning thinking we're gonna have $5 million of discretionary money, and then it ends up being $3 million of discretionary money. And then we find out, no, that's only $700,000 of discretionary money, and half of that's already been spent. And so we have $350,000 to fix $25 million worth of projects, and we're just getting farther and farther behind. And I don't, this isn't your fault, but this is a very frustrating thing, because if we can at least have a target and say, okay, just to get caught up, we need X number of dollars.
Like $4 million a year for your streets.
That's
to
above and
maintain-
beyond what we
That's
need
to
right now.
maintain your PCI right now.
Right,
It's probably a little bit more than that now.
That
'cause
was the
a couple-
fluid.
and we're only budgeting, what, 900,000, just increased it to, was it 750, we went up to 9 something?
So that's a keep actually, and it kind of rolls in. I think I know where the strategic plan, and
So-
they all kind of morph together, but you're
For me,
heading to
the
this.
capital plan, those things is where I'm kinda stuck. Someone articulate for me the difference between that plan and the strategic plan.
So the strategic plan's this high level where you're talking about, we want the community to have, employment centers. Okay, so we're gonna work through and try and come, and there'll be, but whether it's ordinances or policies, sometimes it's money. You're gonna put
it's
investments
zoning.
in.
So-
Zoning.
Right.
So
So
like
that-
a build out is what we want our community to look like, is that what you're talking
Correct, well,
So
so
that we have a destination in mind,
yeah,
right? Where are
right,
we
you have
going?
an end.
Yeah.
The financial plan, a capital plan, is how you look at all these obligations you have and say, okay, here's how we're going to tackle them. So, I've been told in the past, but they'd bring you as a long list of projects, and then you would try and pick, okay, which ones are we going to do? But I want to, tonight I don't want to necessarily talk about specific projects, I want to talk about what kinds of projects are your priorities. And then we will bring you back a plan that should, over the next few years, try to address those. Some of those are gonna show up on there, you say, but that's not ours, that's because it's already an obligation, we're trying to capture all that. But that you have a plan, so when your constituent says, when are you gonna fix this road? It's either, it's not in the next 5 years, or it's in this year. We've got engineering money spent, and then we anticipate building it, so that there is a plan. So it's not every year, here's a list, and they get
So-
budgeted and bumped. There's a plan on how to do it, and it takes some discipline.
Okay, so here's maybe pie in the sky. I'd like to have every road that needs to be brought up to standard done in 5 years. Every road
So
in the city that has to be at standard, have it done.
what's your standard? That's the first, that's where a strategic plan say, here's what our,
Whatever that,
Standard.
was it 60,
engineering standard, our current
the D,
engineering
the 60%, or what, 60%,
So-
whatever it is. So at least they're that or better, or whatever that is or better.
and we can provide some of the things so you can.
And I
get a
understand what
sense,
you're
but
trying
yeah.
to say is, but we can define that. We can pick a number of service that has to be, and then and we want that done in 5 years, okay, great. That's gonna cost $40 million. And our total discretionary income over 5 years might be $20 million. So how do we close that gap? Then that becomes a financial decision. Maybe we have a bond we need to do. Maybe we have to bond just to catch up, right? But then there's fire stations and public works and, land things we have to pay for and $6 million loans we have to pay back to water funds. And I mean, it just on and on and on. So we can come up with all of the goals and things we want, but then we have to start making some really hard decisions about how to get there, right?
Exactly, so I'm glad you're talking, because that's usually where strategic plans fall apart, is you do it, and then you get to the budget, and everybody goes, well, we can't do it.
Right.
But I think you have to have a plan, so the first part, when we're getting to that, is we'll have to decide what is acceptable on streets. So what I have up here for infrastructure, in this budget that we're doing right now, we don't have time to come up with a full plan. But I wanna know, as staff is putting together this capital plan, what are the kinds of projects, we'll start with streets, that you're interested in. And I put in this, there are a couple different things that fail when it comes to infrastructure. You have it's failing because the asphalt's falling apart, 7,300,
It's dirt.
right? 7,300 or even parts of 6,000, right? The ride is terrible. It was just done incorrectly. Bellagio way over here, Freeman, I think, your street, they just weren't built right. So they're failing, right? So that's one failure. The other is the growth in the capacity. And I asked our staff, we don't have any of those right now that are truly failing because there's too much traffic on them. So that's a good one not to, I didn't know that when I wrote this, but I asked Bryce and he came back and said, I don't think we have any of those segments. So we have failing streets. And then as you look at that, you have to decide, what is our priority? Are we doing existing streets that are failing? Are we doing new streets that maybe are being driven by demand because of construction? Are you, how many things have we already obligated ourselves to spend? It's all that kind of balance. So maybe the first one, of those kinds of street projects that are out there, what do you want us to focus on in this budget? Are we building streets for new development because the developers are anxious to get going? I have told my staff, we're not letting developers make our budget decisions. So just because they want to move forward, they're welcome to move forward, but their reimbursements may be years in the future. Because but you still have to decide, is that something you want to do? Do you want them to build that road, the full thing, or say, just build it to fit your development and we'll worry about it, expanding to the rest of the right of way later? Those are all kind of these give and takes. We're looking for is, where do you want us to spend money in this 5-year plan? If I'm looking at streets, what kind of projects do you want me to prioritize?
Those are the kinds of conversations I'm expecting to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around this.
So
Right.
fix the ones that are already broken. Build roads that would facilitate the things that we set as the priorities, whether that's commercial centers, whether that's single family residential, whether that's, whatever those things are. I think the roads that we would choose to build would be connected to whatever that particular plan is, right? So that we're not just
Say,
building
Probably
new
what
roads
he's
that comes
gonna
up,
say. The starting point is this, I mean, we paid for a good study on our roads. We had one presentation on it, and that was it. Right? We did not-
The PCI study.
It's like you said, you spend time doing these
Not
things, and
everyone,
we
yeah.
talk about it for an hour and then move on. So, to me, what that really shows is that, to me, when it comes to roads, like, that's the conversation to start with, is go through that again.
use that tool.
And they need to know what level we want the streets to be at, because it's not just fixing the failing roads. We have several failing that need to be ripped out, completely done.
Substantially less if you maintain
Right.
the ones that aren't.
Then the
failing.
next question is, at what level do we maintain all of the public streets, and what does that cost, right?
Yeah.
Then the next question is the new stuff,
Yeah.
right? And can we meet the first two and still meet our obligations on
And
the
that-
third?
And that's where the hard part comes is, we may as a council have to just say, we don't build any new roads for 3 years, cause we don't have enough money and we've gotta pay for the roads we've already gotta go back on. That's gonna piss a lot of people off,
Okay.
slows down a whole lot of development, but we may have to make that
Reality
decision,
is
right?
reality.
So on these two, so I heard we have streets that are falling apart, and frankly, they're not old. The Freeman subdivision over here, the street's falling apart, it's gotta be less than 15 years old. And the street, so we got taken, somebody got taken,
Defect, yeah.
definitely a manufacturer defect. You have those kind of streets, Bellagio over here, Harvest,
Is the same.
Heritage.
You know, there's 60.
They're just built.
73rd.
You're tearing them out, you're building it, then you have your maintenance, and this is these two. Of these two, where do we focus primarily right now?
Yeah, cause then the hard part is the least expensive is to maintain and your money goes farther that way. But then you never address the failing stuff, it
Right.
always gets bumped.
So, you set a priority, then the next piece is, it can't be 100% here or there.
Right.
We just have to decide, where do you spend your money to make cause it's true on that failing, if you saw the report, right, you've got the curve for asphalt. It's cheaper to keep it here and up than it is to fix it here. Some of those streets we're talking about, they're already down here.
Yeah.
Right.
They're already at,
But here's the,
to be in a city that's 20 years old and see a 30 PCI.
But
This
to me,
is
to me, that's
but
part
we
of
don't
the,
get that
there has to
choice.
be a long-term plan. We have to fix the failing ones.
Right.
So which ones do we do in what order?
But here's the
right?
problem.
And at what level can we do the maintenance until those are done, and then we can take the funds we were spending on those and roll them into maintenance. Like, it has to be a multi-year plan.
And that's why this process is so important, is because up to this point, we've never had the choice.
So where I'm,
Because we can say a road we need to
that
fix and there's no money for it, and so it doesn't get fixed.
this is the conversation we need to have with each topic. But if you're saying in general, what do we want? It's just too much. Let's, like, this is the conversation for us to have. And quite frankly, at least for me, when we take care of these, to me, basic services issues, right? Then we can move on to what kind of parks do we wanna have and
Sure.
kind of stuff. We can give some general direction as far as, I've preached for years now, we need to balance land uses. It hasn't happened. We can say all we want, and then it turns into a political battle, right? And we've blown everything up in the last several years. So, at least for me, for the effectiveness of time and whatnot, let's focus on those main things first, and then we can move on to a broader, okay, we've got the basic stuff fixed. Now let's talk about vision and all those sorts of things.
So,
Because without all of this, we don't have all the things that Stephen said. We don't have the feeling of this or that or the other, because I'm frustrated every freaking day I drive down the road.
And your constituents are as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing it from everybody.
So as you, I'm hoping that we can say, okay, what I'm hearing is, we wanna fix here before we do new. Most cities spend almost all their resources right here on the arterials and collectors, cause everybody sees them. They wear out quickly because there's so much traffic, and you never touch your residential
Oh, we
streets.
did that here.
Right? You just can't, because there's never enough. So one of the things I would argue, and I'm not gonna tell you what percentages, we need to determine, okay, what are our percentages here? It's a little bit like the credit card thing when you're in debt, right? You're gonna put some here and you'll keep working on them, and as you pay off, you keep knocking them off. You can't fix every failing road in the next 5 years. I think because their costs are so high, if you put everything in there, we'll get 40% of them done, and we'll have other streets starting to move into that. So we've gotta find a balance, but we have to have a plan to do that.
And
I know,
I'd be
but we're
okay.
so far behind. I mean, the PCI report said we need to be spending north of $3 million a year to maintain that level. We just budgeted less than $1 million.
3.4 million.
So every year that we're at that level, we're at least $2.4 million behind in maintenance.
And every lane
I mean,
mile you add, you need to add $11,500 for every lane mile you add. When the new developers come in and they add a new street and lane mile, just using their numbers,
For
probably
10 miles
14
is
foot wide.
another $115,000 of annual maintenance we need.
And
Here's the thing
if
with
it's a 2-lane road, it's 5 miles.
With the plan, right, if there's a plan and we actually see progress, and we can tell people, yep, it's scheduled, it's going to be done, that's one thing. But for me to tell them the last 6 years that, yep, it's in the top 10, I think it's gonna get done this year, and then it disappears,
Never
it's not
gets
even
done.
on listed.
Yep. that was the
Right?
thing.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's the difference between having a plan and working, and that, I guess that's at least my expectation is
But
that
we've never
the
had a
capital-
plan though, right?
Yeah, with the capital
We've
plan,
had budgets.
we do
Budgets,
have-
but that's
And
not
why I'm
plan,
saying-
yeah.
Things like that and prioritize.
But that's what you're trying to do right now.
We
So-
need to start with this.
The budget is more easily hijacked when we don't have defined plans, right?
Exactly.
The
So
defined plan
here-
really constrain the budget.
So help me understand where, I mean, I'd rather put $150,000 towards those things than towards a consultant or towards somebody tracking these meetings and whatever, like how, tell me how.
So we get to the push pull, we can talk about that as well. There's a push pull between what we need staff, is this is a growing community. We're having more demand put on, that we, frankly, there's going to be a failure at some point, right? We don't have enough people to make it, right? So it
Well, that's
costs
the
more
thing is-
to do work.
Hire more people and that the most expensive thing in any organization is people.
We-
Right?
We've had this conversation, there is a push-pull, right? We hire people, if we hire people, we have facility needs already, if you hire people, you need more
Space.
facilities. So
And if
part
we're
of
paying
this
more
is,
salary, then we have less money to build the facility.
exactly, right, the push-pull, and here, it's like, okay, so we wanna do this, but if I'm struggling in finance to run payroll, then I have to fix that, right? Because my crews don't go to work. If we're not paying our bills on time, because we're swamped, the contractors don't like working for us, right? So there's this balance that we have to have, and some of it may be a new investment in some people, right? Our court is still staffed the way it was when we were a town of, 5,000 or however many when we started, and we're 65.
700.
Our numbers are crazy. Talking with the police detectives the other day, looking at the number of calls they have, or their number of cases. And I've seen detectives with a lot more cases, but some cases, they're not all equal. A domestic violence or an assault case is completely different than somebody stole my bike. And you could have 50 of those somebody stole my bike cases and work through them. But 20 of the others are eating up your entire time, right? And so how do you balance? So part of this is we're growing, so we're gonna need some staff in certain
I
areas.
guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not expecting an answer now, but that's gonna be kind of an ongoing question is that's what we want you to tell us. This is the best way I think for us to get to those goals. And for me, it's gotta be quantifiable, it's gotta be start with the basic things first that we just keep getting further and further behind.
Because if I'm being frank, it feels like we're having a lot of effort and a lot of discussion and who knows how many hours of this we're gonna have to come up with a strategic plan. And we're actually arguing over $500,000. Right, which can't do any of it. So, to your point, it's like really, if that's it, then we've gotta make some drastic changes. I mean, we gotta do some big time
So I
things,
feel like
right?
this is more like a conversation of, are we starting from the top down plan or from the bottom up? To me, the top down is, okay, what do you guys wanna see, and then we'll go down to it, and at least for me, it doesn't work in this environment, right? Because we have all these things, I think we have to start at the bottom. Here's the main concerns, right? I mean, people go home every day, they expect to be able to get home on the streets without dropping their transmission on the road because they've got that frickin' pothole that, even though it gets patched, it's there every couple of months.
It's gonna
Right.
pop back right.
I turn the water on, it needs to come on and I can have actual pressure that the sprinkler heads will pop up, right?
Call the police,
If
they show up.
If I'm paying for secondary water, I wanna have secondary water, right? If I call the police, I want them to show, so like those basic things, where are the questions at? From your point of view, like and I'm not saying answer them now, I'm saying when it comes to streets, what are the questions you have for us? What do we need to answer for you for the goals for streets, water, storm drain, parks, police? Like if there's a gap that we need to answer to fill, let's start with those things first. Get those to a basic level, and then we can say, okay, we're functioning
So-
the way we should. We've got at least a clear pathway to achieve
That's what we're
those
trying to do.
basic goals. Then we can talk about the
what we're
big
trying to do.
picture.
So for this year, in this budget, that's a conversation we need to have. This strategic plan is not going to be done or ready in time for this budget. This biennial, we've got to have some direction on your top. So what I'm hearing you all say is you wanna deal with these, but I'm gonna propose a split
Propose a
between them.
percentage, yeah.
Here's how much we'll put on this, and here's how many street miles we can do with that. Here's this, and here's how much of a resource we can put towards it realistically going forward,
Yes.
And I
right?
think,
And then see how long that takes us to deal with what's out there.
then I think back to Teddy's thing, he said, how can we increase our budget? That has to be a huge part of our strategic plan. when I was running for office, I spouted that a billion times. Why do we have this much in one-time money? Why aren't we replacing that with more commercial revenue? Why don't we have more tax revenue? Why don't we, so if we want to fix some of these, and there's a bond question, but bonds just borrowing money. So how do we become a city that can accomplish the things we want to, because we have enough revenue stream that we can accomplish it? Somebody was saying something about property tax. We can't increase property taxes enough to even hope to ever matter to this. It's not even a conversation.
Well, and to me, that's somewhat quantifiable too, go to build out, well, everything's entitled. Everything in
Yeah.
city boundaries is entitled. That should be a mathematical problem that can be worked out. Here's what it looks like at build out today. If we add more stuff to it later, then that's when you adjust that plan, right? To incorporate those things,
Right.
but at build out, this is what it would look like. And to meet those needs at these basic levels,
And that's
right, we can have that conversation.
and
But we
that's why
can't really get there without starting.
right, and that's an important piece when we make decisions. If we decide to change something from commercial to residential, can you afford to do that? Because at build out, this is what you're gonna see, this is what your kind of revenue you're gonna be dependent on, so can you really afford to do that? Those kind of things really help drive those kind of decisions.
Nathan, do we look at this as with no budget in mind, basically for a strategic plan? Because this strategic plan is not tied to any set budget. So like, if we had all the money in the world, how would we fix this, or how would we lay it out? Because potentially that's what we're looking at for the big picture.
So in my experience, what councils will often come up and say, here's what we want, and then we start talking, here are the dollars and cents. And so in a budget, you have you've got all this stuff. You may want to take from one area, priority, and redeploy those assets someplace. It's not saying that
Okay,
this
but
down
let
here
me-
is not great, it's just not as high priority.
But to me, again, that's,
So let me ask
I
this
think that's a
question.
question, is it top down or bottom up? If we could do everything we wanted, well, it's not the case. We have obligations. We
That's-
need to start here.
Right, Alan, I mean, let me ask this question, and this is back in the napkin. I'm saying swag, but you probably have it way more defined than that. How much money does the city actually have discretion over? I mean, how much is already committed to salaries, debt service, maintenance,
Reimbursement agreements.
operations, that kind of stuff. Once you get that stuff, let's just say that, we draw a line and say the base level we're at right now is where that's it. How much revenue in excess of that do we actually have that we can possibly have discretion over?
Well, you can go back about 10 years and it's right at $3 million almost every year.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, it seems like you'd bring it up.
And that number will ebb and flow a little
Sure.
bit. Again, as every time we add a park, you have to have staff, and those come out of your general fund, so keeping that. If we know where our dollars and cents are for streets, cause that 3 million doesn't include the streets, because that's already in their budget.
Right, so if we
You
just
can
say,
start to put-
maintain the streets, we don't even have enough discretionary money to do that.
No, we don't have, we have less than the 3.4.
That's what I'm saying.
What you would have to do, so part of that discussion in a plan is, what is an appropriate PCI? Is PCI the appropriate thing that we should be
The
tracking? Engineers measure it.
Well, and
Is it
there's gonna be
rideability?
a different level for the type of street, like you said, right?
So PCI, you can have two streets that have the same PCI. One rides terribly because it's really, on the other one's falling apart and is not structurally, but it rides okay. And people will view those differently, even though the engineer will say they're at the same level. And so it's not a great proxy, but it's one that pretty much everybody uses. There's also a rideability index, which I think they did when they did the laser with us. Sometimes that's how smooth is this road? How does it feel to drive on? They don't really care that the base is inadequate and it might fail at some point. We do as a city, but they don't care, right? As long as it rides well that day. So that will be something that you all have to decide. What level of service are you willing to live with? And have that conversation with your citizens and say, we want this. All of our money, we get 3 million, we need 3.5 to bring it to some level. Again, and the legislature probably prohibits us from saying, if you're gonna give us a new street, we want it to be not 3 inches of asphalt over 6 inches of base, we want 8 and 5, right? They probably won't let you. They would come back and say, no, that's, cause they're already making a push to have,
Standardized.
remove all of our standards and just do what the
Yeah.
industry says is the standard, which would be defined by, the Property Rights Coalition or whoever will decide what it is. So those are all some challenges we can't control, but we can set some priorities based on this. So what I'm hearing on streets, just correct me if I'm wrong, you want us to focus on existing infrastructure people use every day that are failing. We'll deal with the new ones later.
What's the percentage of no return on the maintenance? Like 70%?
Oh, when a road gets more
When it-
expensive?
When it hits that.
Once
40
it's,
point?
once it's below 50, it probably doesn't get significantly worse on the drive. And so, you're rebuilding it. If you're in the. It depends on
Seventy
why.
is kind of where they were heading in
I
that report.
think you're shooting, I think this 3.4 is like at a 75, which is, most communities you're shooting around 70, that's realistic, you can't put enough asphalt down constantly to keep it at 80 or 100. 100's a brand new street, and after 1 year, it's probably down to 95, right? It's just, it's not a realistic number to shoot for. And so maybe what we should do is, I think we should be having that test or that study done again, because it's scheduled, I think, every 3 or 4 years. Is that once we have that, we can take you out on streets that are very specific for a test and say, is this okay, right? Is this a level that we can shoot for? In our residential streets, you can do slurry seals, treatments over them that will seal the water out, add 10 to 15 years of life without a huge cost. But it's not rebuilding that, so if it rides rough, it will still ride rough, so you have to strategically decide, okay, we're gonna spread this maintenance money as far as we can, and then we've gotta tackle certain streets. And if there's streets that development's gonna happen on, well, maybe we piggyback when that's happening. But a lot of ours are like, so 6400 West, a portion of that already exists. The developer's gonna fix part of it, so if we do the rest, we're kind of leveraging their effort. But 6,000's already built out, right, and it's failing. And so how do we fix that? And part of it's failing because it's not built, it's built as a country lane and not as a
You should
city
just
street.
put EV instead, right?
Failed.
Well, me focusing on streets, I think this is how every one of these items will go. From a planner's point of view, I do a financial plan, I do the same thing. And I tell my clients that if you try to put all your money towards one issue, your plan is gonna fail.
Yep.
Because those other things have needs as well, so we need to say, yep, the failing ones are a priority, but there's no way we can pay for them all right now, so give me a plan, a schedule that gets followed and we see progress. So when I meet with them every year and review it, here's our progress in each one of those categories, right? And we have a little discretion with this amount of money. So we put, I call it building a foundation in each category, right? So we're working on each one, and then this year, one of those bills got paid, so there's an extra $100 a month. What are your priorities? Where do you want to put that? We're working on all of them, this is the progress we've made. Now you can decide where you want to put that
So-
next dollar, but we don't have that basic plan yet, we don't have the
Look,
foundation.
So that's what we're trying to put together right now.
There's two problems with that. Is that number one, we don't have the ability to build up an unlimited savings. It's capped on how much we can save for those things.
But it has nothing to do with savings.
It does. Because let's say that a road costs $10 million to build.
I'm just saying, we're making progress in each one, so every year you have X number of dollars to work with.
Yeah, but you can't
We're putting them towards these.
you can't save it up enough to actually get to the thing being done. I mean, if, what I'm saying
You're talking
is,
about trying to do a $10 million road in
yeah,
1 year
if
versus.
if a road costs
taking
$10 million, and we just wanna do it all at once, we can't.
Yeah.
Because we can't have $10 million just set aside for one road, cause we can't save.
That's kind of my point.
Right, we're kinda hosed there.
Right.
So when we have failed roads that are gonna cost that much money. We can say we're gonna allocate $500,000 a year to fixing it, and we're gonna fix it in quarter mile segments, and then by the time we actually get to the end, we're failing at the other end again. I mean, it's just,
So,
you know what I mean?
So I think we're on the same page this way. I don't know what the right way to say this is. I totally understand what you're saying. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So if we know that that we wanna build that foundation and say, we wanna fix these roads, but we know we can't do them all at once. We know we can't even do the one all at once. Here's the plan to do it. We can bond and do this one or that one over this next 10 years, and we can allocate this much from the budget each year to do that. We're taking a piece of it, but we're not putting everything, all of our street money towards that
Understood.
thing, right? We know we need to have a certain level of maintenance. What are our priorities for that? What are the main arterials, collectors, et cetera, that we have to keep at this level? And then what does that leave us to do some of the others that makes the most sense, right? And we spread that out and say we still have this shortfall, but we're making this much progress here, we're making this much progress here, and we still have to do new roads. I mean, we're not gonna be able to say, nope, we can't build anything else in the city, because then that has another effect on the other side of the ledger, right?
Yeah.
And there are some of those roads that come up that, okay, if they only do the minimum that they have to because we can't participate, we're gonna be in trouble later, but that might be a decision we have to make on some of those.
Right.
But we have to set a foundation in each one of those categories, right? And that gives us the plan to at least start moving in the right direction. As it is right now, we don't have a plan at all.
Agreed.
Right, we're just looking at the list going, all right, well, what do we throw at it this time? And then we come back to the same situation the next year, okay, what progress did we make? Well, I don't really know. We just have more stuff to throw it at.
So that's the idea of a multi-year capital plan, right? That the items in year 1, 2, and 3 you're working on, you've already got engineering, you're doing 4 and 5 might move a little bit because something else may pop in that you weren't aware of. But as you start to move forward, you keep track, you know where you're at. If you say we're going to fix 6,000 and it's gonna cost $3 million, and we only have $3 million a year, we may wanna set aside some the year before, okay, we're only gonna do this because next year we're gonna spend this. And then these numbers may not always be you're exactly right, you're gonna tackle them and it's gonna move a little bit, but we have to, the plan is what we're meeting on tomorrow to bring back to you, and I wanna make sure I can tell them, here's how you prioritize, because we have engineers go through and prioritize. I don't know what that number truly means to this council, because when I look at it, and we'll try to identify those that are obligations that we've already signed contracts on. Some of that takes up your transportation impact fees. Some of it is gonna be general fund, because we signed agreements that said we would pay for it. And so
Can I say
they'll
it
all
this
be
way?
in there.
That I think for that, the priorities have to be whatever obligations, either, legal or contractual obligations we have to do. After that, we have an obligation to provide services to the community, right? So that's what I'm saying, if we're failing to provide adequate service, we should prioritizing the catch up. That doesn't mean we ignore the other stuff. We should prioritize the catching up to providing adequate service.
I agree, except for the question I have on obligations, and I don't disagree that we should meet our obligations, but the question is, how much latitude is there in those obligations?
Agreed.
Do we have to meet them today, or can we meet those obligations in 15 years when we have more money? What is the true obligation?
That's where I was gonna go. So you could decide based on each of those obligations, and their agreements are all over the board.
Yeah.
On how we meet those or where the money's coming from. I would never say, we'll just pay them all next year unless we have something that says, this is due and payable. We have to have a plan that makes sense. And when somebody comes in and says, I wanna do this, and we say, that's fine, you're at the end of the line, and understand we're getting to the end of the line in 8 years. If you're good with that, then move forward. And in 8 years, but we need to do that, and that is a key piece.
Right.
That we have to figure out, but it's not all gonna be in 1 year. We just need to, we have some of these that have sat out there for a long time that we need to at least make a good faith effort to try and start paying off. And some of them are not large. I still, we might owe 100,000 here, 100,000. Doesn't mean I'm gonna just go pay them off, but I might say, I'm gonna give you 25 this year, and over the next 4 years, we're gonna pay off.
Yeah.
Because we have other obligations right now.
Yeah.
I think they would be happy at least with that, because right now it's just kind of sitting in this, it's limbo,
Maybe
it's not
someday
going anywhere.
we're working on
Right,
it.
we're good for it, we think. So we have to, we just need to come up with a plan, so I'm,
I guess that, and
That's
at least to me, I feel like that's what we're saying is, you guys kinda have to tell us what those are, so we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, when you come to us and say, well, do you wanna do this or that, we don't know all of the underlying stuff, it's like, well, if it really is just a decision in a vacuum like that,
Right.
and give you an answer.
Right.
But I think at least what I feel that question that's being asked of us is, on each one of these, whatever, we need to know what level you want us to target. Well, it's hard for us to even answer that question because we don't have any of the backup information. So, at least for me, that would be my suggestion or preference is start at the bottom, let's identify those things. And on each one, streets, okay, what are the questions you need us to answer? What's the level of maintenance you wanna maintain on which ones? That would leave us X, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here, like, we can have that conversation on that specific thing, if that's,
Is there like a level, like level of service, like right now we're at a D for our traffic, right?
So
And so is there that kind of industry acceptable thing on this other that we can say, this is what would normally be related to a D, which I hate even though we're a D, but whatever. That's what we're industry standard is a D. I
So-
know.
because you
He's
talk
that.
about that level or that standard, we're like, well, why wouldn't we want the highest? Well, cause it costs too much and it's just unrealistic, right? Give
But at
us
a certain
some
level, the
realistic,
cost benefit
yeah,
ratio,
give
that's
us some
something,
realistic scenarios and then we can say, well.
And that's my only, that's my only disagreement with you, Steve, like obligations, failing the citizens. I think and you need to split it, like the failing and maintenance needs to be almost equal, or 70-30 or 60-40, whatever that is. So you
Sure.
don't get more failing at the time you get to the end of the budget.
I wasn't advocating for percentage.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that the failing has to be prioritized as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, it has to be mapped for sure.
So-
We just
I
want a
on that same
plan that
page,
makes
yes.
incremental progress. And we'll help answer whatever questions we can, but we need you to give us a starting
So-
point.
so-
for each one.
this has been very helpful, because that's what I need to be able to tell them is, when I see a road, okay, it's all the first stuff is in new roads, because that's what the developers are in front of their face every day. It's like, but let's set that,
On the back.
that's farther down. What's more important is let's fix these roads. Now, we know we have some new roads that are going to be required because of schools and things like that, and an MDA, right, we're building 6,400 up to our park at some point, right? We've already signed this obligation, yes, we're going to do that. So we'll have to keep track of those, but this is helpful when I meet with them specifically on the streets, and actually, kind of this approach on all of them is what's falling apart now, what do we have to fix to meet the needs of our current citizens?
Right.
Then it can move into that kind of more, well, how do we meet the needs of future residents? But if we're not meeting this and we're always focused on the future, your
So-
existing ratepayers are getting, or taxpayers are getting ripped off. They'll never be happy, and you won't get the new ones because they'll go, let's.
Yeah,
why
so
go back?
something has to be, so
It's just
failing
mutually
failed,
assured destruction.
road maintenance, and new road construction has to be part of it, because if we just cut off all new roads, we don't get any new one-time money for other stuff we still
So,
need, right? You know,
so we're gonna balance this. I just wanna,
More impact fees, right?
I wanna make sure that we understood, because I think the direction in the past has been more on focus on new roads, but
Not
without,
from the council.
I think just in practice, right? What was
Yeah.
happening is that we're giving you a list, but then we can't fund it, so then we're off
Squeaky wheel.
doing something else. And I don't know if you call it the squirrel moment or whatever, the shiny new nut. Oh, let's go do this. We have to have a plan. We have to work on it so that we don't end up
Sabotaging ourselves.
doing that. And so we started with this strategic plan. You have all those things moving on to kind of guide as you get working through this. you may have after a couple years of this, you may say, okay, we need to shift priorities a bit because of X, Y, or Z, whatever it
That was
is.
the fluid part I was
Fair enough,
talking about at the
Yep.
very first, there's gonna have to be some of that, because I think every once in a while, you're gonna have those experiences, oh, look, here's a new contract we didn't even know was there for anything, you know.
You can put pause on this plan at any time and
Cause
fill
you'll
it
have,
in.
cause
yeah,
you'll
before we
have
go.
to.
But I think, I think if there's somewhere where I think we're making progress, is this understanding is when you're just pulling things out of the ether, it's really almost an impossible place to start, right? Like, do we start here or here? And it's all this amorphous, nebulous, conceptual, philosophical stuff. And to Jared's point, that's a very chasing your tail kind of conversation. But on the other hand, you can't just start with saying, okay, we're gonna tell you what the budget will be, because you need some of this nebulous stuff together. But so I see it a little bit, and I think you used the word earlier, of an iterative process where we try to get more specific, you come back with more budget, that lets us get a little more specific, that lets you redefine the budget, and somewhere we get to a point to where we have a workable plan, you know? If that makes sense, I mean,
It's the way it's the way it works out.
Yeah.
We could come up with this great ethereal plan, and we'll still be back here trying to make the budget and
right,
it all
to
fit
mesh
together.
that somewhere in there, yeah.
But what I don't wanna do is create the plan, put it on a shelf, and then just go do our budget. Or even our capital plan, my first city I managed, Alamosa, I walk in there and they have this great capital plan. I mean, it's got all sorts of stuff, and it says we're putting $800,000 a year to replace the city hall. And it's been in there for like 6 years, and I said, so where did we put that money? Oh, well, we've never done it. So what is it? Well, the plan was created by engineering, the budget was created by finance, and never the two talked. So council was just as frustrated, hey, this road's never been built, but it's in the plan every year. Yeah, it actually was supposed to be built 3 years ago, and now it's again. So we have to marry those up, and so right now because they haven't existed, it's been a little bit heavier lift. It actually makes Alan's job easier when we can project, this is what we think we're going to spend, instead of, we think you're gonna spend 3 million, and they walk in with a $9 million request. And we go, how do we do that? So there's a lot of the process, but when we meet on this one, I think one of the things that happened, there's a bunch of projects that I saw on their list that are say unfunded. So when I need to deliver them, if it's truly unfunded, we don't know where it's at, it's not happening next year, right? It's happening in future years, although in reading some, I think the unfunded is, it's never been budgeted. It comes out of storm drain or something. So we'll work on the nomenclature, so when you get it, if it says unfunded, it'll probably be out in the out years, means something that should be done. There's just no funding identified for it yet. And once if it becomes a priority, then we can start moving into finding money for it, but at least keeping track of what some of these projects are that need to be done. Again, having a city that's only 20 years old and seeing some of our streets in the condition they're in, when I got the PCI study from Justin, I've gotta go drive, these streets can't be that bad, and they are. I was like, I don't know how they got that way, other than we have some weird soils here and we didn't require enough over excavation in the past.
Is there a metric we're putting these projects on, like priority wise?
So we can do that, so the engineering has a metric where it's a mathematical formula, but,
It's confusing, right?
I don't know that, it meets what the engineers are after, but it doesn't necessarily take into effect or impact what council wants, or how their constituents are talking about it, right? Because they're saying, we want this, and the engineers will be like, well, the numbers say this. It's like when we talk about warrants and streetlights, people want a streetlight and we'll say warrant because it's a mathematical formula. Without coming up, we have to have something, citizens just want us to acknowledge there's a problem, try and fix it, and not just say, the math doesn't work, you can't have it. So we'll work on that, because I went through those numbers, they sent me their process on how they do it, and I was trying to understand it and think to myself, okay, what is that,
Do you need an engineering
what does it
degree
tell
to
me?
get it?
Well, it's like,
They have a rubric.
does it
They explained
mitigate,
it to us when they showed us.
yeah, does it mitigate a public safety risk? Okay, Well, that makes sense.
Oh, their flow chart, yeah.
That's worth 20%. Is it essential to the overall system? Is an arterial collector, that's gonna rank higher than a residential? Is it something that we've got money for, so we can leverage? Right, that makes sense. I would put that in that metric. Cause if somebody else will give you some money to do it, you might do it. Or is it something we've already committed to do? That's one of their metrics that ranks fairly high. A little lower that is, does it mitigate failing infrastructure? Which you just told me was one of your higher priorities, it's one of their lowers, so I need to have them adjust their metric.
Well, again, not necessarily, right? I mean, if it's a public safety issue,
But not everything's not every street that's failing is a public safety issue.
right?
But it is a quality of life,
And
it
it
is
may not, a public safety issue may be on a street that's fine. It could be some design element, it could be a speed issue, it could be, you know, all those kind of things we talk about, traffic committee.
when we talk about public safety, it's well beyond what Chief does or what UFA is doing. It's really that sense of how people feel, how they're feeling in that neighborhood, do they feel safe? Because you can have the best crime statistics in the world, but if your neighbor is a victim, they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
Right? They've been victimized. It's a sense of feeling, and so you can also have terrible crime statistics, but if most of the town's safe and it's just,
Right.
people might say, oh, I feel safe here, and you're looking at your statistics going, holy cow. Yeah, how do we fix that?
Statistically, you know,
I wouldn't
it's like-
walk around.
No, really,
Hey,
really, we
Alan,
hardly have any really, you know, violent crimes.
I have a
I know
question.
your neighbor was murdered, but
So,
really,
So far, my
statistically
yard
speaking,
is-
you're still in a really safe neighborhood. Yeah, that doesn't really.
Like
And
flying
as
on
I
an
said, so
airplane.
when we talk public safety, so even there, it's beyond just, is it a crime, it could be, do we have an unsafe crossing, right? That to me is actually a public safety issue there.
Street lights out.
How do you do that? Yeah, it's too dark. There's all sorts of things, but I think their metric here, again, the one, is it replacing failing infrastructure? What I'm hearing from the council is that needs to be a higher priority in that metric. So when we're coming back and saying, we think you should do this now, and here's why, you have a sense that we're also keeping in mind your top priority. And we'll have to, this is all push and pull, right? If you put money here, you have to take it from here. So there's this balance. And the one thing I would ask council is, don't get stuck on percentages every year.
Right.
Because you need to be flexible enough, as you're looking at, we're presenting, you may say, all right, we're gonna do this, next year we're gonna do a little less of this and a little more of this, and that's completely fine. It's not violating the concept, it's just, if we're planning for it, then you know
Right.
that we're moving through, and as you said, we have to show,
You know, you've got your foundation in each one of those, and here's our discretion.
and you're trying to take projects off the list.
So is it fair that when you're using the phrase strategic plan, a key element of that plan is understanding how, as a council, we're gonna prioritize some of these decisions, right?
I would
I
say.
mean, that's really what you're trying to get to.
There's a couple things, right? That strategic plan is giving you a vision, okay, this is important. We want our citizens, the transportation to flow efficiently, which means we don't want them to lose their car in a pothole someplace, right? We want the roads, we want the intersections to function, right? We're gonna set at a level of service D, right? That's okay, right? We're gonna come up with some standards. So yes, but it's also plays into, in my other cities, we've always added a tactical plan. Why? Because I have this strategy, but I'm going to do this year. If that goal is really 5 years out, I have to know and give direction, know that we're working on something that actually is making a difference towards that goal. And the way we've done that is try to capture it in what we call the tactical plan, just because it felt like
Well,
that was the right word. If you have a strategic plan,
we're
we're doing
unsure
it.
whether or not we should fix the pothole with road funds or, you know, landscape it as a detention pond.
I just use it for
Probably an
swimming
area
holes.
where we have
Swimming holes.
an issue.
On the 35% that we can have in our general fund, right, isn't it 35%? Tell me how that works, is
Up
it,
to.
yeah, right, up to 35%, by when? By the end of the year? Could you actually have a carryover of 35% and move it to 50% as long as it was down to 35% by the end of the reporting period? So it effectivally could save 1 year over to the next year and spend it in the next year.
And I
No,
don't,
you have to be 35% at the end of the year.
At the end of the year.
yeah, so at the end,
But if you were at 35% at the end of this year, you could carry that over, right? And then build that up to where towards the end of that year, you might even be up to 70% as long as you spend it down to 35%.
Is that fiscal year or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just wonder, there's just a little bit of ability
And-
to save a little
Yeah,
bit.
you can do that.
in Utah, are we allowed to do so we have a capital fund where we spend a lot of our
Carries a
expense.
little.
Can we save in there towards a project? Is there a time limit?
As we grow the revenue base.
You're supposed to identify the project if you're saving money.
So if we pick 6,000 west, which I know is gonna be expensive, we say it's an $8 million project and we have $2 million extra this year, we're gonna slide it into this capital improvement fund earmarked for that. So the next, when we actually go to build it, you're putting the difference in plus that, and that's how so there is a little bit of ability to save, so we'll have to look at.
We should get a little creative in trying to pay for some of these.
We've been doing that on the Public Works facility. We've set up a fund where money goes in there. Most of it's being paid to that property, but
Yeah.
we are setting aside money in a savings for that.
And I think that kind of gets to the next piece here. I think we're good with that. Staffing needs. So it comes to your point, and it's that push-pull. If you put money here, you can't afford to do this. But if you spend all your money here, we're gonna fail on this side. It's a tough one, and what's not on there, which was that conversation with UFA and their 11.5% increase for us. Based on our demands, right? So part of that is their thing, and the others, we're using their services at a much higher amount, right? Over time, how do we do that? I will say our HR department is swamped right now. I think when they were formed with 2 people, it made sense, but when you added PD, I see stuff every single day that makes me nervous that we're going to we're gonna fail there. Finance is pretty thin. Alan carries a lot of that on his shoulders.
Yeah, when he presented with the youth council, and I knew this, but, cause Alan's not just our finance guy, he's also our IT guy, that's a crazy thing that he wears both hats. That he is the head of IT and.
Sometimes you get lucky and you have somebody who has that skill set.
Yeah,
We probably have to change that when
just a big
he
hat to
retires.
fill.
I don't know that I'll be able to find somebody who has that skill set, both, right? Yeah. Finance is gonna be more important because we have Scott who can run IT, but he needs somebody who can bounce ideas off of and do things and.
Have a co-part,
So those are, and I didn't put that in there, there's more, right? We need a detective, right? We need another detective. And if we have another detective, we actually need some office staff to support because there's all these pushes and pulls, how do we do that? And so in part of this would be, if we hire somebody to take on some of these other loads, does that free up enough time for the team to be able to do a strategic plan? Right, without having, I don't really foresee hiring one person to track all this, but it would be nice to have an analyst available in the city who could do some of the research you're talking about. Well, what should we do? Right now, let's try and figure it out, but we don't have any analysts in the city, really. But a management analyst. Yeah, Alan ends up doing it.
We've always dumped everything on.
Right, we throw it to Alan, hey, do this. It doesn't mean that people wouldn't still be doing that.
Right.
It's just, we don't have somebody else where you could say, okay, here's a bunch of numbers. Go out and research, what would it take to run a fire department here? Go get us 3 cities of like size, what they're spending, so we could do that, right? Right now, it's gonna be me Googling really quickly and Alan Googling and coming together and trying to throw something for you. So we're just short in it. So in this budget, we're gonna propose a few things. The legal I thought I put persecution up there. Prosecution, sorry.
It's the same.
Out of my corner of my eye, I thought, holy cow, did I do that wrong?
It could be worse.
When I got here, we had Heather Gower, or what was her last name?
I'll never forget what's her name.
I think it was with a G. Was it Brower or Gower? She gave us, or Grover.
Grover.
It was a G, I knew it was a G. She gave us incredible service for what we were paying for. She just took a job with another city, with Bountiful actually, so she's not even working for that firm. But she had moved on to do something, and we have another one who's a very competent prosecutor, but he is giving us exactly what we're paying for. And we're not used to that. Plus, our demands have increased. When we've got 130, what I would call heavy cases sitting out there, not all of them are prosecuted in our jurisdiction, but a lot of them are. A lot of those domestic violence end up here. We need more than what we're paying for. And we're probably at a spot where we need to think about bringing that in-house. We have some issues with the judge. I don't know if you've told them, but
I mean, I did have a brief conversation
Judge
with the mayor.
Farr is leaving. He is going to work full-time for Sandy, so we need to hire a judge. He has already told us we need more court days. We are still staffed and running like we were 8-10
Well,
years
to your point, Keith, we're
2010.
doing 4 hours on Tuesdays, right?
We do full days on Tuesdays and half days on Thursdays.
Now that it's video, we don't see that, so,
Yeah.
but
But
The
it's
mornings
still,
are busy.
that's
Then we need to be
a
doing full
city of
days, 3 days a
15,000
week.
people.
He thinks at least 3 days a week.
We're probably
We
at
could
3 days a
probably
week in
do-
order to adjudicate these things quickly, to follow up on, again, we have a
And to
lot
do
of
it right.
domestic
Is that
violence.
all is that all a hit on us financially?
Yes, because a
Yes.
full-time judge is a lot more expensive than a quarter.
So we don't, there's no,
So
it's
there's,
just the responsibility of being a city and accept this.
This would be my question, I don't even know what our obligations are
Yeah,
when it
me
comes to
neither.
that.
I think
I
that's,
would've, I thought that they would've been running all
Yeah,
day
it's like
every
I
day.
thought that the school district would take the crossing guards to tell you that.
No, that's us too.
Like, what?
there is some discussion, heavy discussion that the state is going to step in and take over these courts and essentially create circuit courts out of it, or district
Circuits.
courts.
District
Back to
courts.
circuit.
So they would bring in, they would add that level of court that, they would add another level of state court and they would just take over and the cities would be out of it. I would love them to do
That's
that.
it.
That would be
But
great.
but we'd still wanna be a facility.
They would rent our space from us then,
Yeah.
right? We could generate.
Whereas we would take care of our HR overcrowding by utilizing that space.
But
It's
if you
a-
lose a court, you can't get it back.
It would be pretty expensive
I
to
learned
change
from
that
the
area.
AOC today.
It's pretty single purpose built.
You don't ever get it.
But again, right now, the state has not taken over, so that is something you could look at. Do you even want to run a court? If we don't have a justice court, we're writing them to where are those tickets?
You would contract with another
Contract,
city, but if we lose this court, it doesn't come back.
But the question is, would
You
we
don't
want
get
it
that.
to come back and if the state's taken over, would it ever come back anyway? So those are, I have no idea.
won't be
I'm just
considered as a
asking
building.
those.
Would we have to modify our
So-
building to fit
I'm
standards?
just asking those questions.
So this building was built under AOC.
They
and
like
and
meets
that-
all the
that's actually
They
considerations
would
of a
want to
judge.
use our court.
Like a judge gets a
So
bathroom,
could
and he
we
gets a
get-
certain
we
size.
With no
contract?
medical or no,
Well, they
yeah,
have suggested
no,
that, like I said, we have a neighboring city who has a judge that will be
talking about a
retiring in
prosecution,
August.
So there's an opportunity
they've
for us to-
suggested
So
we
metal
reach out to
detectors and
them and
stuff,
maybe
we
we
would
wanna
have
do
to
an interlocal,
implement.
but we're the court.
Oh, man.
Do they have a
And-
court?
Yeah,
They have,
Oh,
they have
one
another.
over there.
And they use their council chambers.
I've never gone to courts.
So,
So my
So there's-
suggestion is
Yeah, never.
when we're looking at these things, instead of trying to figure out more money to pay for it, the question is, I don't know,
Is a necessity.
chief, do we want it here? Is it critical we have it here? Is it a necessity? Is there opportunities to bring in what you were just talking about? Just some out of the box ideas so that we're not just always spending more money on
It's
things that-
convenience for our citizens, right?
Yeah,
But-
It's a really
Exactly.
good service
Well,
for
At
what
our
cost?
citizens.
Yeah,
is the
exactly.
question.
so for all these, we're trying to figure out, can we do it within existing resources that are already budgeted that maybe we're
Still
not using? So we
calculating
still
that,
have,
but yeah.
for that one, we already have money in the legal budget to cover, I guess it was Gordon's salary. It's still in there, so you could just rededicate that to an assistant city attorney / prosecutor. So think about it, cause if we decide to get rid of the courts, right now that prosecution job is not full-time, so we'd have to find things in the city for them to work on,
Yeah.
which we have plenty. If they went away, most cities this size probably have 2 or 3 attorneys.
I guess when you say think about it, I don't even know what to think about,
Right.
is my point.
need
It's
an
like,
upgrade there.
I don't know why we want it, why we don't want it, why would it be critical
We don't
for
understand.
I don't
So
know.
we'll put something together specifically on the court,
That'd be
because
great.
it's,
Though the AOC needs an answer now.
yeah, they want us to hire we need to tell them we're hiring a judge,
It's a 6-month process, and
Does-
his last day
and the
is
state
April
sets the
15th.
salary. So
Does
they
it
should-
generate funds or does it cost us funds?
Courts don't generate.
They're breaking
income.
even most
They're breaking
years.
even, okay. Right, more to it.
You're not gonna make,
Well,
well, we don't get any money
I know.
from the tickets.
You know, the thing is that we've got all these extra cases that aren't getting there, so, you know, an extra day may change that enough, I don't know, but we've been pretty close to break even on court.
So it's really not a cost to us.
No.
Though, anyway, those kind of things, I guess for me, I'm like, I don't know, those would be really,
Well, so
really
that's-
nice information for
yeah,
us to
So
understand.
we gotta go fast, though, how fast do we have to,
Well,
days, weeks?
the AOC needs to start the process as soon as possible because like I said,
They
it
need
is a
6 months.
6-month process to get a judge. The judge's last day is April 15th and we have cases scheduled. So
There's a judge
So
at the
we're
If
river.
we start right now, we don't get a new
We don't
person
get
he
anyone
until
retires
July or
August 24th of this year.
Give me a
He is at age and so it is a forced retirement.
I guess in our
So-
city you do.
So that's what
We
Tammy
would
said.
like to approach Riverton and see if they would like to enter an
Get through that
interlocal.
case.
We
It's
obtain a
very fast.
judge
I know
and
some
we
people
are
who
the
change that
sources, we
ordinance.
serve both cities. Then they could pay a portion of our judge's salary.
Once the judge is
Should we get a full-time
So,
judge?
so
Yeah.
Tim, let's put something together in writing, and I think just kinda say, here are the options for them, we can bring it to a meeting.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter, we're not gonna get one at a time anyway, if it's April 15th, 6 months is past that, so.
So
Yes, but
one of
we're
the
gonna
options
have
would
to
be,
figure out how to contract with somebody. We either need to enter in a temporary interlocal with somebody now so that our cases can be.
Process, yeah.
so our
Can we
thought
get
would
on
be to
a-
try and
us
talk
to
to
Tim
Riverton,
Judge?
although their judge is retiring in August.
find
So
out.
it might be an
Now
alright
the
time
6th
Might be a
to
break.
get us
to
August.
get us there,
Wanting-
bring it full time, and then maybe
What-
we're doing court or they're doing
Show me
court for both
What you
communities.
really have.
I mean, for our citizens, probably better be here,
Yeah.
cause it's more
The
convenient.
AOC would prefer.
And our, we have a new courtroom, they use
Or it might
council
teach
chambers.
them to not break the law, cause they have to go out of our community to be prosecuted.
You could,
Incentivize them, yeah.
I'm okay with that too.
But just, I just wanna show this, cause I just asked Alan this too, is that generally, as we have added staff over the years, we've also had increased revenues from other sources, and so
We're even
the
keeled
margin
on, yeah.
between them hasn't really shrunk, that's where that 3 million-ish is coming in.
That's what I said, it's,
staying pretty
The service you
consistent, right?
provide
Right, we're just,
increases your.
right,
Should be.
so that, those are moving in proportion to each other, at least to a point. The hard part is that unless we're increasing revenue sources, that 3 million is never gonna get bigger, right? We have to have more sales tax revenue, more commercial, that kind of stuff.
What are the major things that increase our funds there? Tax is one, right? Sales tax, revenue,
That's
the
right.
main,
You
that's the
can
main
talk
one.
people into leaving their lights on all the time.
Sales
yeah, 'cause our
tax,
franchise fees would go up.
sales tax is our biggest, franchise tax is probably our next,
Property taxes.
Impact fees or
so they're
ebb and flow, that's
completely
different. Okay.
different. They're different funds, so when we're talking 3 million, that does not
That's just
include
your general.
General fund,
impact.
yeah.
And so when we spend a lot more time talking about general fund, although all these concepts will end up in the other funds.
General fund is your operations. We've got funds for each of the impact fees and
The one advantage that we have here is that our PD is in its own fund, versus in the
They've
general.
got lots of money.
well,
They have adequate right now.
It's the same as you listed.
The council
products,
asked us-
Yeah.
the
Barely
council asked
sufficient.
us originally to make sure that the police budget was covered by the police property taxes. So we reported on our financial statements as part of our general fund, but we've set up a separate fund so we can see what's coming and going.
And I would say the police budget is adequate, which by definition is barely sufficient, but it's sufficient.
But as we grow, that's a question, and
Yeah,
the
it
council's
becomes a
asking for,
challenge.
is our mill levy appropriate for what we want as a level of service,
And
right?
competitive salaries
Right,
and.
as cities grow, and the
Yeah,
competitive salaries you'll
buildings
see in this budget year are starting to compress us. because it's getting eaten up in salary.
Everybody, yeah.
The challenge will be there this year specifically with salaries, but PD,
Equipment
You can
coming up
never-
in the next few years as well, and yeah.
well, there's an item on one of your
We're gonna
coming
delay a
work
bunch of
meetings we're gonna
trucks.
talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's all that's still
The
coming.
least expensive thing we get the officer is actually their handgun. It's the cheapest thing we buy.
People think that's the most expensive thing we carry.
We
And
should
right
get
now,
them more guns.
Agreed.
officers are digital. They're a walking computer. They have all sorts of stuff on them, and it's
Yeah.
expensive, and it doesn's last very long. Right?
Yeah, those
And it's
tasers are good
filling
for
up-
about 5
And
years.
it's filling
Yeah,
up
3 to
our
5 years.
terabyte thingies.
Yeah, we just not terrible. Our, we can only store data for 20 days and then.
Yeah. I mean,
we are
it
thieving
is
terabytes, but
the challenge.
But women and children will die.
right,
So-
yeah, that's my motto. If we don't get this, women and children will die.
So we'll bring all that kind of balance. I think there's a few spots where we really need to make some investments. The challenge is, this is a great building. It's really nice. It wasn't necessarily designed, I don't know what the time frame it was gonna be, but the offices are too big you have a lot of wasted space.
no
So it's
basement.
hard to grow in. PD is bursting.
Police just
at
took
the
over
seams.
half the building. They weren't even supposed to be here, you know?
And,
Except feeling unwanted.
so we're actually right now
Right.
exploring
Fine.
sending some people back to the old city hall.
Are you going?
Oh, I didn't.
Well,
Wait, say
Probably
that,
Public
say
Works,
that again?
trying because we have so many like PD demands, probably sending some of our like events or others over to use that building. We already have code enforcement has
You
moved
mean
over there.
Our, the Salt Lake Community Building,
Their old
City
city
Hall?
hall.
The old city hall. Now, at some point, it's kind of a temporary thing. How do we deal with code officers where there's no place to put them? All that comes down facilities. We've talked a lot, Chief and I have talked about parking constraints and evidence is that we should probably lose the grass on both sides of this
Yeah.
building and push our parking lots out. And in theirs, maybe we put a building that can hold some of their evidence or their, what was the,
well, we need
Yeah,
garage spaces conditioned. Evidence space is becoming critical. And
It-
we
it's-
have items now we have to keep forever. They changed the law. So if I get a sofa in a homicide, I gotta keep that forever. Forever.
and you don't
Not
wanna
99
sit
years
on it.
anymore.
It has to be in
I
a
have
certain
some property
controlled
that I was-
environment, and a certain.
Yeah.
It has to be that we can pull it up in 100 years and reanalyze it. And I don't know why they 99 years seemed okay, but now it's forever, so.
So,
I've been
I'm
watching
trying
that
to-
Catching Killers thing on Netflix, and those cold cases, man.
that's what they're thinking.
30 years later,
They pull up that couch and they find that DNA.
they'll
strand,
find,
yeah.
And if we
there'll be
find
new
it-
technology
Yeah.
that
That's what our
Yeah,
legislature
it'll
was
scan
thinking when
the-
they changed that rule. Hey.
They'll be able to talk to the couch, and the couch will tell them it was.
So, one of the concepts, we have these two
they'll be having that.
two lots in
Spirits
front.
still there.
Maybe there's an opportunity to do some public-private partnerships with the developer where we would, a condo essentially, we would own the upstairs where we could move some of the staff or the PD over into that. And there's commercial on the bottom. I don't wanna be a landlord, so that's how I would propose that we would look at it, but those are some options that we'll be bringing you. How do we get something here without us?
Footing the bill.
We own the property, so there's gotta be some value towards that in these partnerships.
Well, and this goes back to what you said, Sherry, bring us all available ideas, and
Yeah.
right now, I have people on top of themselves in community services, so we had to find some place to get them to be so that
So
they can work.
We're using an office over there,
Yeah.
and Salt Lake Community College is using 2 rooms at the moment.
And they're almost vacated.
Yeah.
Yeah, they built their new
But
building.
And I love the idea
This-
that if it was perfect world, this is what we would build, what the architects brought in, you know what I mean?
It
But
was
it's-
pretty, and it was
Yeah,
great,
but it's
but it
like,
was
but then we have to
ridiculous
figure
at
out
the
how to
same
pay
time.
for it, down to
Yeah.
the budget part, so how can we think outside and still accommodate what we can as best we can
But-
until the perfect world allows us
To
to
Chief's
do it.
credit, though, he did cut out, $30 billion building out of the budget,
I know.
Well, but then the
They're
other
better-
building went from 30 to 40, so
Yeah.
he only gets credit for 20.
20, but I'll take it,
How do we
you
look
can pay it in
10,
later years.
15 years down the road where we're at build out, right?
Want
We
that
can run that
20s,
metric like
50s.
Jared said. We have that absolute, that build out, we have X of our current mill levies and taxes and fees. how do we get a public works building? How do we get a public safety building? Do we bond now and start building with the revenue potential? I know betting tomorrow's dollars on today's projects is rough.
But it's also, is the interest rate on a current bond cheaper than
The
inflation rates?
Agreed.
I mean, there's a whole
lot
bunch of
things,
analysis to be done, but it's still, how much can we borrow? Is it sufficient?
Is it gonna pay back
just-
itself? Is it
Crazy
is it-
time
is
to
it
build
creating-
though right now, right? So you're,
Yeah.
I mean, the interest rates are.
My clients
I mean,
ask
it's
me all the
just all
time,
the-
when's the best time for me to buy a house? I
Yesterday.
tell them,
10 years ago.
when you're ready. That's the best time. It doesn't matter what interest rates are,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It's when you're ready.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, some of it is we didn't know where to build things. We didn't know what was coming in the city. I can't tell you that a substation belongs someplace until I know what the boundaries of the city might be. Because if we build something for $30 million and it's in the wrong place, that's not great for anybody, right? So we have to know what this is gonna look like before we start throwing
And-
money in.
Chief and I've talked a lot about that maybe it's not one big giant building, maybe it is kind of the substations like.
I'm really
South
liking the
Jordan
ideas.
just-
Like they combined one
Yeah.
that they have over there, that's
They've done a
pretty cool.
very, very good
Especially
job.
with our own fire service.
Yeah.
So when you build a fire station, we
It's not
really
the
need to
operation
consider
cost,
putting money
it's the
towards a
startup
police
cost.
station with it.
Just
Yeah.
like
It's
Bob's
also
Mountain,
the
that
operation
way,
cost.
right?
With
That station
firefighters?
should have some.
And
They're worse than police.
Well, to me, you need to build those costs
They are.
into
By a
those
lot.
two budgets and those specific
Eat a lot
taxes.
Yeah,
so those are things to think about as we've gone and looked at those places, and it gives you a great savings, and it allows you, if the fire department's going there, you know that's a good response model.
Well, and I
Because they
look
use
at-
those metrics.
Yeah.
What, most of the calls of service are medical, correct?
For fire.
fire?
Oh, yeah.
Do we just go
Accidents and-
private medical to lower our cost of service? I mean, I just.
Yeah, I think those, you look at.
Get our own ambulance
look at
service.
Draper,
There's a
Draper
revenue piece to
is,
this ambulances.
about 8.5 million
Amen.
between their fire and their ambulance, and it's half and half.
Yeah.
Right, their ambulance can generate revenue. But if they made all that much money, wouldn't the private sector run ambulance services?
Gold Cross, that's pretty decent, I think.
But
They
you
do,
think
but see,
would
they
be
do
everywhere
inner
saying,
facility.
"Hey,
Yeah, that's
Their
true.
facility,
What was that called?
Yeah, cause
You can
it's,
make
I
money
mean,
with
a
that,
a 10 mile,
It's like $5,000.
yeah, it's like $1,000 for an ambulance.
Yeah, which is a ripoff
They
to
just
those
build
people
Mickey.
who have that.
Well, it's
Hey, but some of the
insurance money, right? Yeah, it's all free money.
Socialism.
Yeah.
I'm on a.
Now we're back to Sherry's talk, you know.
All free money, Sharon.
I sent out a big email yesterday about socialism to ULL.
So I mean, for what it's worth, I think we have to make sure that we're, maybe not adequately staffed, but sufficiently staffed, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think we have a choice. I don't think we can not have
Yeah.
backlogs of cases for
Yeah.
2
it's a
years.
push and
and-
pull, right? It's a
Yeah, I
level
mean,
of service.
I actually asked this of our former city manager a long time ago, right after I started. We do budgets, not audits, all the time, and I said, do we ever do an internal audit? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, like, having somebody external come in and do an internal audit. And it was pushback because he said that staff would feel bad about it, and I'm like, it's not about attacking staff. It's about saying, is there better practices that will help you be more efficient?
So you're not talking internal financial, you're talking internal audit of function.
Efficiency.
So, I actually think that's a good thing. Sometimes there are cities that have somebody, that's what they do, right? I'm trying to remember what we called them in Reading, because audit automatically went to finance. We had a different phrase for them, but their job was to kind of look at things and come in and at process improvement kind of.
Yeah, like a
moment.
Six
Yeah.
Sigma person.
So I was listening to
Yeah.
a talk radio show on my way driving the other day, and he's like, yeah, because remember when you came in and I was showing you how to edit these pictures, you know how you used to have to edit before Photoshop? And he's like, and then you came in, exactly, and then you came in and you showed me Photoshop, and I was like, oh my gosh, right? Because I think that sometimes we do our jobs and we do them efficiently and we do them well, and we don't and because it's working and it's the way we've always done it, we don't even realize there's another tool that if we change this up, it could save us a tremendous amount of time. Anyway, I was just wondering if it, and I don't know, it's probably maybe not time right now, cause you're still trying to work through all the other functions, but maybe at some point we should look at some of those kind of things. Are there efficiencies that we're missing out on because people don't even know they exist or they are used to doing their job in a certain way?
So one of the things I've used in others, because I couldn't afford to hire that position, is just I sent my staff to other cities to go spend a day with somebody who does their job in another city. And even out of state, I sent staff down, my brother-in-law works, he's in charge of storm drains or something in Reno, for Sparks, Nevada. Big deal, and he was telling me just in off passing how many miles of pipe they camera every day, and I'm like, how many people do you have doing it? He tells me he has less than we do, and we can't do any of that. And I'm like, what's going on? So I sent my staff down there for 3 days. They paid for them they went through them, they went all this, and they came back, and we changed all sorts of processes, and it was amazing how much more efficient we became just because we went and talked to somebody else who, they became efficient because they were starting from scratch. They didn't have it, so they went out, they went to other communities, bought the right stuff. We'd been doing it for a while, and we just didn't know that we were terribly inefficient.
Yeah, and my concern always about bringing that up is somehow I end up offending staff, and it's nothing to do with that, it's just simply about, I look at the way I do things all the time. I watch YouTube videos all the time about, is there a better way to do this? Has anybody done this before? Because this is taking me forever, you know what I mean? Just to get ideas. And I'm not saying they're not doing that, I'm just saying that sometimes, just like you said, if you're exposed to other, it's like, that's so much easier.
To me, it's an easy question, right? And I know I've had this conversation with you and certainly you guys. If you ask someone why do we do that way? If the answer is ever because that's just how we do it, that's how we've always done it, you have a problem.
Yeah.
Horrible, right?
It just means they don't even know why they're doing it. And you can get burned by that, right? So part of sending
Systems
them
created by default are horrible.
was to make sure that they knew
But it's
why they were doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Anyway, so I would just
Everywhere.
actually ask that we encourage that kind of, internal audit, meaning how efficient are we really? Is there places we can be more efficient? Cause sometimes rather than hiring other people, it's just simply a matter of changing processes so we become more efficient. I believe we have a great staff and people who try real hard, but sometimes there's just ways to do it that just make it more efficient.
We have a lot of staff, I think this is the only city they've ever worked for. There's Wendy and Tammy and we've worked for other places, Alan has worked for other places, and so doesn't mean they did it well, but sometimes
You know what
yeah,
not
that's
to do.
bad, don't do that. Frankly, I go to conferences and I learned as much from my peers about
Oh, me too.
sometimes the nightmares they're talking about, it's like, okay, note to self, don't ever do that.
And I'll say that Nathan has already made some of those changes internally and brought some different processes to us, so we're already kind of going to have a little
And
bit.
ask
job
that one
sharing
question.
with all the different
Why do we do it
departments
like
and
That's kind of
monitor
what
how
I
Break
they
it
do
down.
things.
That's what I
You'll
was
see if there's
told.
better
Yeah.
ways to do
And
it.
so,
Do we give our employees an opportunity to, because a lot of them are just putting out fires, right? They're working 40, 50 hours a week and having that time to sit back and take that continuing ed or go to a conference or,
We do
Okay.
get all that.
We actually, this city does a really good job, and I think one of the things why I think HR is thin is that Travis has a hard time, if he had more time, cause he's the one who kind of runs through our culture and helps. How do we bring a group together to talk about, hey, we're doing this, how can we do it better? Citywide, not just individual departments, and I think he's just swamped. And so then we try to take it in and do other things, so in our budget, we'll do more to spell out why we think these are going, and probably, I think, when we bring you back the capital plan of this, we'll at least have some write-up as to why we think this should happen, so that you can make that decision. On the court, I think we'll try and do something sooner,
Yes.
because we would need to do an interlocal, and I think right now, when we were talking, try to do the interlocal with Riverton if we can, that gets us till August.
doesn't that make sense? I mean,
if they won't.
I think we can make a
I love
decision.
that.
Well,
Well-
and Dave Bricky and I already had this conversation about a month,
Cause they
2
haven't
months ago.
started looking for a judge
'Cause he
yet
was
either, and
thinking,
they
I don't wanna
are
do
about
this again,
6
you guys
months,
do it.
Yeah.
so.
No,
Sorry,
it's just
can you drive that
impossible
conversation
for
Yeah, we just need to go
me to
meet
give
with
any
Yeah, we just need to
feedback
sit down.
as far as even
Yeah.
long-term, maybe having their,
I'm just gonna
Well,
throw
I
this
think
out
that's
there
where he
though.
was going, is.
You know, if we have a strong
Human
mayor
mind
form of
process.
government, all this budget stuff would be his responsibility, not ours.
Can we vote on that?
I'm
Well,
seriously
I would
considering
tell
this.
you, it would still be yours, cause you
Yes.
hold all the purse
Because
strings.
you do all the voting.
been strong,
Strong here this
Mayor.
It's a joke.
There should
It's a
be
joke.
two budgets.
It's a joke.
The council does one, the mayor does one, and then you have two.
Go to Provo.
Then you can each get your
And
own.
when you meet Provo, you meet
attorneys and
the
you
chief
can-
of staff for Mayor Kafusi. It's great. And then you meet, I'm trying to remember his name, but he's the executive director for the council. They have
We
two
got an
city
executive
managers. They have two city managers, essentially, or two city administrators, because they don't always get along.
Now your street budget just went in
And
half.
they're hiring for one, so one of them left.
I think the council one
They didn't get
left.
along.
Yeah,
I think
so
he was
the
getting ready to
council
leave,
director.
and then
Sandy's council executive director
They did the
just
same
left as
thing,
well.
yeah.
I suspect it's an open position often.
Every election,
think
You
about it, it's
imagine?
not
I
a,
can't.
it's like you have
I love
two
Harry.
Two
high-paid
political
individuals
parties.
who have to try and work because in West Jordan right now, they're splitting the
Oh my gosh.
Or Westwood.
they're gonna have a mayor's side of the building and a council side of the building.
And a chalk line down the middle.
Sounds like a bad summer
Were
camp.
they start there?
So they're bringing out the duct tape.
Oh, did they went that way?
That way, don't
Yeah,
go.
that's right.
Once
Yeah, so
we've got
they'll
the
put, it'll be
elevator,
duct tape, they'll put
Yeah,
it down,
exactly.
don't cross.
It's like a bedroom I shared with a brother. You know?
Right?
Hey, don't cross this.
So-
Mom, he's on my room.
Now that was a little- just like
Um,
the
This is fine.
Facilities.
And then this was the other person.
We've talked a little bit about that, we're gonna bring back some concepts maybe for the public work, how do we do that? PD, parks, we're gonna have to have some long conversations about
$170
priorities, because you've got
million parks budget.
you got 250 million in the master plan and and $30 million to build 250 million, that normally doesn't work. You know, the federal government might figure that out, but we're not going to, so, we'll have to figure, there'll be some longer discussions on parks, but we're gonna come back
Have a
with some
Harriman Bitcoin.
concepts here.
We can sell it.
Would you do that?
Harriman
You're gonna do,
Let's go cryptocurrency.
Some
We can
blockchain.
mine,
We're gonna do
have a
some
room
crypto.
full of mining.
okay, so we already
That's
did this, we talked about the push pull. We'll bring you back some write-ups, specifically the court will come back first, the other ones will come. And so this one is, so Mayor, do you wanna cover, this is the thing I know you talked with our senator about.
I think we talked a lot last week, the last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, I wasn't here, about packets and I think that's very beneficial. The other thing coming up a lot, Harriman is now being made an example again. Senator McKay is running a bill, or is considering running a bill aimed at some of our processes. I wanted to find
Like
out.
what?
I wanted to find out.
Like
Like
I'll
not,
get
when
to it.
something's
Let
up
me
for
get to it.
about
action,
to
not
tell you.
taking action on it.
He
I'll
said
get-
it at the town hall.
And
Yeah,
I
he
wanna
did.
make sure this wasn't just a Senator McKay,
Yeah, you called him on it.
right? So I reached out to the league and I reached out to others and I asked Nathan, a couple of the processes we do are very unique to Harriman. It's not just, they are unique to us, and when that happens, people take notice.
Is it because we don't know what we were doing, or we just did it because past councils did it, or?
A little bit of both. So there's two things I would recommend that we do. One, I think we do the process, two things. The one about having a work meeting on every item before it goes to that's not standard process. That is not standard. You have it in a general meeting, so everything is out there. Does not mean you have to take action on it. In other words, if there's something
So wait,
questionable.
it's complaining that if it's on for action, we don't take action, but that's what they want.
No, he's not saying that. Sometimes you don't need that work meeting. Sometimes it's
He
straightforward.
was complaining about.
I
Work
totally
meeting
agree
and-
with that. But what was just stated is that his problem is that when something's on for action and we don't take action on it.
No, he can't stop us from not taking action.
Right.
The process
We
is having
verified
an
that, but
an
it
extra
still
work.
chaps it.
Yeah, it does, but having an extra work meeting instead of having it in a work meeting, especially because a decision could be made. If it's pretty straightforward, we could make a decision without having that extra work meeting. It could be so straightforward, we have it.
And then have the same presentation in a general
But we
meeting
don't
with the
see
same
it.
slides and the same report
The only,
over again.
I mean,
We don't
as far as
see
process,
action on a work meeting.
yeah, no, I don't remember ever having a set and fast rule that way. What we have said is that if it's on one meeting, we don't want it on the other. It shouldn't be in a work meeting and
On the same night.
the
Yeah.
general meeting on the same
Yeah,
night.
that's crazy.
Okay, so when I got here, I was told, and I think staff's under the impression that everything's supposed to come in a work meeting before it goes to a regular meeting. So, and it feels, so my perspective, it feels like our work meetings aren't policy, they're not direction kind of where you're wrestling with policy. They're essentially the meeting before the meeting. You're going through the staff report, and then the next meeting, we have the same staff report.
I may have mentioned that last time.
And I think it's, I don't think there's anything wrong that you choose not to make a decision the first night you hear. I will say in every other state I've worked, when you introduce an ordinance, you have a first reading, you introduce it. And then the next meeting is when you take action. So a lot of these things where you feel like you have a public hearing, you don't wanna make an action, to me, that's normal fare, because
It's
that's
like
what you would
first reading.
normally do. I think it's unique in Utah that we've kinda tried to shorten those.
So that's the only other one that I can think of is
Yeah.
that for a public hearing, we said we don't wanna make a decision that night because there's a lot of the public that might not be aware of it until after that meeting, so.
And I
And that was the only
apologize.
thing.
And that wasn't been brought up,
Public hearing.
that's not,
Yeah.
and again, I
Cause he knows
think,
he can't.
and I don't know if this might come from previous that was their impression too, that was the impression out that the state has of us, is that we do require it to go to a work meeting first,
So
and that's what our staff has kind of understood.
if you, but I think there's some things that I do want to come to a work meeting for. If there's some things that are complex that I want
Yeah,
to understand some details
Isn't
that
that
we're
what it's
still
for?
trying to work through before, isn't that what, so what's the
And-
purpose of our
and I
work
think that's
meeting?
okay, I think what we're seeing is, like, when you see the staff, we do the presentation in the work meeting, and then you get to the general meeting, and it's the exact same presentation. What we probably missed is there wasn't that issue of, hey, we're not sure how you want us to handle this.
Yeah, that's what I think that these are for, I mean, work
Right.
meetings, right? It's-
I would say that policy discussion, handle it this way, look at it this way, that's what's helpful in a work meeting. But we have a lot of items that have come forward that are just simply, here's what you're gonna see at your next meeting.
You
Yeah.
know,
It's fair.
yeah, because I think what we've done is we've said, let's use the work meeting as a place for council to have the discussion. And then when we get to the general meeting, that's easy for the council. But the problem is we're still having the same discussion because that's in the public meeting.
Correct.
And that's where people have a chance to listen and then,
But
Give
they
feedback and all
clarified
that
they're
kind of
both
stuff.
public meetings.
I know,
because
but this isn't,
this
this is the meeting where
recorded.
people get to comment.
And I don't think,
They'd have to listen and watch this meeting and then go in and have a 2-minute thing at the beginning of a meeting because that particular item might not even be in for a public
Public
meeting,
and
right?
I
So,
don't think they're upset that there are times for that, he's saying it shouldn't be a policy, that it's required to take that step.
I would
We don't
agree.
have
I don't
any
think there's a
written
policy.
policy about
there
it
is a
anyway.
policy.
Okay, but that's been, okay, and
It's
that's
an
fine
unwritten
that we're putting this
policy,
out
but
there.
staff believes it's a
Staff believes there's
policy,
been a
yeah.
policy that's been said, so as long as we're on the same page.
And this is
guys are
maybe
okay.
a blame the former management thing, but this is a blame the former management thing. I think a lot has been said to staff that council wants. The council's was never aware of that we said, quite frankly.
Yeah,
So again, that was just being done, I wonder if that was almost just habit. That
Well,
was,
I'll tell you,
again,
my personal
being done
opinion
because it's-
is that former management tried to use the work meeting as a, get us talked into one direction to tell the developer, yeah, we've got no problem, and then it's a slam dunk at the next one. But, so a lot of the things we have done have been, at least for me, have been to try to curtail that part of it. Yeah, I don't want a sales pitch, I don't want you to try to talk me into something, give me the facts, so we can make the decision that we need to make.
So I
Is it-
guess clarification is, what is the purpose of a work meeting?
So in my experience, it's for items that aren't maybe ready to come to the agenda because there's those unknown policy discussions. Sometimes it's a presentation from an outside group. Hey, here's something that this might impact the city. It gives you, it's a little less formal way to talk. We have not allowed, by practice, I think, anybody to weigh in. But we've had discussions in a work meeting with a person sitting over on one of these walls who could answer that question, but we don't let them talk, and I feel,
Cause we get hijacked by it.
So
we
I
don't
think,
have the opportunity
But
to
you
have
can
this.
control
Yeah,
that.
we were
You can
having
control
40-minute
it.
sales pitch presentations from developers
Right.
and it was.
Cause they're coming in asking for rezoning and general, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I
And they
agree.
wanna get that rubber stamped before it goes to the general meeting.
And that's not what,
just-
I don't think that's what we're trying to get to, and that's on me to control that from not becoming a sales pitch, where it's just asking a specific
yeah, yes,
question.
no.
A specific-
And we've said that we would allow, if the council has a question for somebody that they can ask, and they are allowed to ask, but
But most of the time, like
want to
that
control
sort
it.
of thing, if the developer's wanting a change like that, to that point, that discussion needs to happen in the general meeting where people see it, right?
And so when you ask, to me, it's not normally, it's not somebody coming in and asking for a rezone. They're not selling you something. You have a staff report, I would make them do it in there where the citizens who are interested are probably showing up for that meeting, not this one. Again, it's things like if we're talking about,
what about like an ordinance change, when we're talking about the structures? Is that ordinance, or
I-
should that be held in there also?
so it depends on where you're at in the process, right? So if we're talking about it and say, I think, give some direction to Chase, we think the ordinance wants to be like this, we'll put it together, and then we probably bring it back to a work meeting. Doesn't mean you have to adopt it, but then you can say, yes, that met the need, or no, but there's a need, there's a purpose for work sessions, and it's usually that policy kind of direction, or just an open discussion with council, because maybe you don't know what you want to do about something. And this is an agendized meeting that allows you to have some back and forth, that's not a full decision, right? You're not making a decision, you're talking about, trying to come up on the fly with a good example. I've used it, we're building, and Klamath Falls is building an $80 million wastewater treatment plant. That's a lot of money. And so as we were moving through these processes and talking about what the state and the feds were requiring, we would come to a work meeting and say, okay, this is what we're being told by the state regulators. This is where we think, and then the designer was there, this is the challenge. If you go path A, we think this is how much it's gonna cost, path B is this one, and council would have a discussion and say, okay, do A, we're more comfortable with trying A. So then we would move down, and so when it came in there, that was the direction, but it was that higher level policy, it wasn't making the decision, it was, we think A might be the better approach for us before we spend $80 million.
But
Well, I don't care what it is, it just shouldn't be the same meeting twice,
Yeah.
That's what.
right?
But it
As long as that is not happening, I don't care what
But it
meetings
seems
it's in.
like then there shouldn't even be a work meeting. I mean,
Can I read
if
your-
everything needs to
Your
be.
council rules of procedure, what it says about a work meeting.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first line's pretty helpful here. The council may regularly convene work meetings to openly discuss upcoming council business, receive updates on items already before the council, or to address those items on the work meeting agenda. The rest of it says the council takes no action at work meetings, which we all knew, and public comment is generally not allowed. Instead, after discussion, the council will refer items to a future regular agenda for consideration under the consent agenda or to another work meeting for additional work and discussion by the council. Notice of work meeting shall be provided and the mayor shall sit as the chair of such meetings.
So
Which is what we've been doing.
So future meeting could be the same night, though, correct?
it could be,
I've worked in cities that do that have a
Okay.
30-minute work meeting before their agenda and says, here's what we're talking about. Here's the presentation that we're going to give. They don't give the full presentation to your point, but they
Right.
say, here's what we're going to be talking about. Do you have anything that you'd like us to bring in addition to that during the presentation?
So there's even a point where, if I'm reading that correctly, where if in a work meeting, there's a general consensus that, yeah, that's good, we're happy with it, let's go. You just move that to a consent agenda. You don't even have to have
Well, we've
an
done
agenda.
We do a lot of times.
Yeah, that seems,
so I think,
but I think there's a lot of things we're going work meeting and general meeting when it could have just been
a general meeting.
work meeting or general meeting or work meeting consent agenda, right?
That's
Or
fine.
7 work meetings and a couple.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, that's what this
My
isn't
favorite
just
is,
benefit.
we brought this to you back in April and then in June and July and September.
Well, I think that's the
And we did
frustration
it,
I'm
and planning
seeing,
commission
is
went and saw it
like,
these 3
holy cow,
times and then we're bringing it back to you again and again.
is that we
That
just
kills
need
me.
to bring it to you in that meeting so you can make a decision, right? Instead of, the accessory dwelling,
Oh my God.
right? You gave us some direction, then we came back to a work meeting and showed you again. We could have had last work meeting in there and said, here, we made, does that fit? If you didn't like it, send us back. But if you did, you could have acted on it instead of waiting for those,
Now we get
and I
into the
think that's where we
presentation.
see,
A third time.
Does it
that-
come back to the work meeting? Is that where
No,
we're
it's
coming?
No,
coming
it's
to
come
the
back to
general.
regular
Okay.
it's going to a regular meeting.
One thing maybe I can add to this conversation, procedurally, I think that I could probably do a better job of, and everyone on staff could do a better job of, is saying, what questions do you have? If they're not answered tonight, kick it down the road, right? I think in the past, sometimes there was too much pressure to say, you gotta make a decision tonight, right? And instead of
Right.
saying, it's on for decision if you're ready. If you're not, we'll just bring it
Yes.
back to the next meeting, and it'll be on for decision again, and if you're not ready that
I
night,
think that's.
then don't do it,
Hits it
right.
on the head.
Continuation is a lot
Because that's
more.
how it always felt for my first day, was if it was on for action,
you gotta take action.
you know, you need to do something, no, we can continue this, why would we not
Absolutely.
continue it if we ask? But
Planning
that's
Commission
always
did that a
been,
lot, Planning Commission
that's
did
always
that.
been the pressure.
But the reverse of that is unfortunately a restriction by state statute. If it's not on the agenda as an action item, you can't take action even if you're ready to do so. And so you're unnecessarily delaying things that otherwise could have just been decided.
You should always feel comfortable saying, we're not ready to act tonight, and just like, very rarely will you get something that comes in front of you that has a strict timeline, either in state statute
There
or
is
federal,
some.
There are a
that you
few
must
things,
take
yeah,
an action.
Some interlocal has to be executed.
We will tell you, here's why. Hopefully, so one of the things you see is,
Well, start to give that.
we'll
that-
try and send that to you ahead of time.
The ripcord.
So it's either going to be an email or a memo from me or from staff. What I've tried to instruct them is, if we know stuff's coming that might have that kind of deadline, try to get it in front of you early so you've heard it. It may not even be in a meeting, but you're aware of what is and why, and then the staff report should clearly say, here's why. The EPA says we must act by this date. Some of these grants, hey, we need this, and it has to be approved by your council, and I needed it yesterday. And seriously, we're getting them, and they're giving us like 4 days to do it, so those need to come straight to a meeting.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'll tell you, sometimes, and this is failure on my part, and I'll just be transparent, is that if I get a package, especially like if it's on the same week as my water board packages are usually around 400 pages, and if I get a package from the city that's 600 pages, I can't digest 1,000 pages of things and be ready to act on it in there. So if it's in a work meeting, it's like, okay, I can digest it, I can work through it with my colleagues, and we can discuss it, and then I can be ready to discuss it in an action thing. So those are the practical things of some of it, because if it's more.
If it's bigger, more complicated, that we need to
and
break
stuff,
down
I
into
feel like
pieces.
I really, just like the ordinance thing, if I feel like, no, if I'm gonna pass a law, I want to understand exactly what the words are, right?
So my last council had a rule that if it was over a certain, so if we were doing something heavy, they wanted it before the packet. So we would send that cover memo, here's your general plan, comprehensive plan is what we call it. Here's your plan. Here are the changes we're proposing. We're gonna talk about it a month from now.
Well done.
But you can ask us, unless you feel like you need a work meeting. So that was always given to them, and sometimes they wanted those for those heavy items. Sometimes they were like, we're so done with talking about this, just move it to the regular meeting, we'll have this discussion there. But to be fair, if we're giving you 600 pages with a week, we need to look at what we're sending, because I think sometimes there's a lot of
Well,
stuff that maybe is not.
Sometimes
as-
600 pages is
Only
the staff
300,
report and then
40
a
pages.
presentation that's just the
Staff report
PowerPoint of
summary.
the staff report, yeah, you know.
But this
Well,
process is
so-
also
so-
gonna slow that down, cause we won't have, this is gonna streamline our process, we're not gonna see so many things, so many times, so our packets will naturally shrink, because we're not
Yeah.
gonna see.
Well, and I
the
think when
same.
you're doing MDAs or stuff like that, they're going to be bigger. As staff, we can try and do a better job of, if we have a boilerplate MDA, say, here are the sections where we've made changes.
Yeah,
You're
that'd be
welcome
good.
to read it all, but when we have an indemnity clause, it's probably the same indemnity clause all the time. You can read it, but
Red lines
I'm
from our
gonna give you
standard, yeah,
a
that's the
confession.
same.
If I read a contract and I know it's the same indemnity clause that Chase has
Same
done,
recitals,
after a while,
same
I don't read
thing.
that anymore. I've already read it once.
Same
I'm
definitions.
looking at the things that change.
We've also
Always.
have the working groups, and so we know that process going
That's helpful
through,
too.
and
That's
it's
helpful.
very helpful.
So for those heavy things, we'll try and do a better job of getting those to you, maybe even outside of the packet, just saying, here's an item that'll be coming, it's a little heavier, you have to read it.
If it's taking you several months to get it to us, you need to give us more than a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause but it's not even.
It's taken
it's
4
like
years
you
to
get
get to us.
it- You get it,
It's
so Friday morning basically, and maybe you're out of town that weekend and then, you
You're
know.
not allowed to go out of
Well,
town.
I'm just like, you just have
From the
such
guy
a-
that just got back.
and
That's a
then you
fair
gotta
point.
work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
It's a
you're
lot.
like, when are you gonna read 1,000 pages?
Yeah, I
I spoke to him almost every day too.
outside of
I
grad
have
school,
my
I've never
sister.
had to do that.
Exactly.
So,
Or pick through those 1,000 pages, past the things you've already read, find things that you
That
haven't read,
change
because you don't know that there are things you haven't read.
and so we used a lot more strikeout kind of, so you could see where the changes were. On, like, if we did an ordinance, we always include, here's the clean ordinance, but here's the strikeout copy, because council always wants to say, well, what are we changing?
Yeah.
Cause if I give you the old copy and the new copy, then you're reading, cause
Yeah,
frankly, when I read the legislation that comes through, they're making a change, I usually go to the underlined
Well,
places.
Yeah,
Yep.
I always
What
go to
did
that
you
line.
This conversation is a perfect example of challenging your assumptions about why you do things the way that you've done. Well, that's just how we've done them, or that's how the process evolved into doing that. We're all like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that by evaluating those things, you can create more efficiencies, you can get a better process.
Sometimes
You
we don't
can-
know what we need to change
Better
or how to
decision-making,
change it, or
yeah.
if we can change it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's why we wanted to talk about it. One, we have a senator who wants us to change for whatever reason, but just from your own, I feel like you're doing things in your work meeting, you know, especially when we have to come back the second half, I'm like, man, we could have done this a lot faster, so you didn't have to spend that much time.
Yep.
Because I know you're gonna hear this item exactly the same, and I know communications, when they review those presentations, when I review them, it's the same presentation that I read before. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know that we've gained anything.
Yeah.
I would feel like the items we wanna bring to you are ones that we,
Heartedly.
Well, and
We're
the
still unsure of.
situations that arose that created whatever the process is, they aren't there anymore. I mean, a lot of the controversial things
Just the oversight that
that made people nervous for one reason or another, those are done and over now.
So it sounds like we've got.
yeah, I think we have some.
We have options, but it's not a policy.
We do have a policy that, we probably should send out, I think it's this rules and procedure, cause it talks about how items are
If it's
put on
not
the
written
agenda
down,
and
it's
taken
just a
off.
practice, not a policy, right?
Well, and I'm having to learn, I think we call them SOPs here most of the time.
Yeah.
I say policy, then I've learned that I need to ask for the SOP because I will write a policy and find out there's an SOP that covers actually what I would say is a policy. So it's just terminology.
Well, there's one other one we've got to bring up too. So we've
Well,
got,
if you're getting that, well, this is how we've done it, right? Again, question that.
Yeah, and it seems silly
That's
to have
begging for you to say
legislation
Which is why
If
I
there's
brought it to
concern
this,
with
cause I
one
wanted to
Good
chat about
discussion.
that.
well, I'll ask the question then before. Is there an understanding among council then? Is there a process to remove something from the agenda?
So
Yeah.
it's in writing
Yes.
What is the right, what does it say, Chase?
Hold up.
and
It's essentially a
maybe
motion that the
different
council makes and votes on.
than our
to-
practice has
But
been.
are you talking about the draft agenda or actually
Takes-
the meeting?
3 to take
An
it off,
agenda,
right?
so if it's in an agenda,
No.
if it's posted,
Takes 2
So-
to put it on and
so
3 to take it
read-
off.
read-
Nobody can take it off.
Read it what it's written in there, because our
Nobody
practice,
can
at least
take
what
it
I'm
off.
hearing,
That's
is I think
fine.
different than what it's
that's
written.
what I
The
wanna get.
applicant is the only one who can take it.
And that's part of the senator's issue.
Correct, the applicant by writing is the only one who can remove an
You can't
item once
use it as
it's,
a delay.
when it's coming out.
But-
Now, you all can choose not to act on it that night. Just say, I haven't had time to review it.
Because we did
I'm gonna table.
for this particular senator, probably what he was upset about is our policy was that
That's the
once
public
the agenda is posted so that the public has access to it, to the packet.
You can't change the
You
material.
can't change the material in the packet because then the public hasn't had the opportunity to digest the information in the packet.
And a bunch of stuff
And
got
so it
changed on
comes off
Monday
the
or
agenda.
Tuesday.
No, they were
yeah.
constantly changing things at the
And
end.
so
Right,
if you
right,
want
yeah,
it,
yeah.
if you want it to be on the agenda, it has to be a complete package by
But
the
what-
time Jackie posts it. And then that way the public has the opportunity to see it, and I think that's a good policy, I think the whole reason we post those things is so the public can see what's going on.
That has nothing to do with removing an item from the.
But what I think he's asking for us procedurally to do, and if we don't do it, they're gonna pass a law that's gonna make us do it, is If that happens, we just, at that night, we just have to basically say it was changed, we are gonna,
During the meeting.
during the meeting.
Yeah.
It's,
They
you
want
have
it-
to, you cannot remove it from the agenda.
They want it to be heard that night.
To be heard that
They're gonna
night.
push their changes. But as we've talked about, you can always just say, okay, we'll take it under advisement. We're gonna consider it.
So we're really, at both of these, we're not
We're gonna
trying to
Continue this
change.
until the next meeting.
Yeah.
for
We're not trying to change, it's just a process,
And
it's a certain.
and I'm fine with that, it's just unfortunate that can have been just a conversation and some
I told them the same thing, we have the same,
on it, because the whole purpose of it is simply because for transparency to the public, so that it's not changing it, it's not
Well,
delaying
and to us.
anything.
I mean,
Yeah.
I look at that packet, and I mean, there were several of those meetings that we showed up prepared for one thing, and they presented something completely different.
Exactly.
And
It's
we're
just-
like,
it's
what are you,
just-
what the heck are you doing?
And so if that, but to me, that just delays things further, because if I say, have it on Thursday, it's gonna get heard this day, if not, then we're gonna say, sorry, you made all your changes, now we're gonna bump it
So
again.
we have we've changed our process internally when things have to be completed. And so if they miss it, they'll miss it. And we've had some complaints, like, you guys take too long. Well, you need to get your stuff to us. And we're telling them, and we're trying to make sure our bids are open at a time where we can meet our own internal time. It's to allow an internal review of staff reports, because it was very uncomfortable to get a staff report. And this was on me, the first time I got it, I'm like, oh, we need to make changes here and here. Well, we already posted this. Oh, so my first time was when it went out, and that was just our past practice. We now have, they probably hate me for it, but there's more of a process where people are reviewing it. So Wendy's reviewing her department's coming up, she's reviewing it, or Tammy's reviewing it,
You meant to say
I read
prosecution,
them,
not first person.
so we can see. So we can read through and say, I wouldn't word it that way, let's talk about this, or I have a question. I haven't worked with you all long enough to be able to guess what you would always question, but I try to think, what would a council usually ask? And if it's not answered in that staff report, I want them to answer it, or I'll change it, cause maybe it's confusing, but we're trying to do those internal reviews on our stuff. So they're done, but we're not taking it until they give us their stuff.
Well, that's what the problem was, is though they gave you their stuff,
Just
and then the night of the presentation, they brought something different.
Recommendation is to
And it's like,
talk about this
no.
again.
So what I would do with that, I think what the senator's asking us is, you would listen to them, here's our new stuff, and then say,
Appreciate it.
this is new, we're gonna think about it, we're gonna need that, and we're gonna continue it to the next meeting.
Or the next.
And I wouldn't close your public hearing
And
at that.
and that's fine, but at the time, there was immense pressure from management, you
for
have to
action.
do this. It's on here, it's
It's
for
an
action.
action item, it needs to be action.
And we found out afterwards that they were making promises that they're in no position to make.
So
So-
action, all's action means is you do take a step, which can be,
It could be
we
potentially
continue
take
it, is an action, you
So-
continue.
So I just, with irritating, we just say, okay, anyway, yeah.
Vote it down.
Fine.
That's an
So we
action.
could just say, make a motion, we deny this, and then we vote on it too, and that would really suck.
Is all the
'Cause then they have a
legislature,
year,
and
they
is the
can't-
whole
Yeah.
Senate and legislature behind dictating that?
well, well, the problem is, like, I asked Cam,
It's fine.
I asked with the league, are we unique in this? Everybody to it, he said, yes, we are very unique in these processes. So,
They are
so all we're
worried
doing,
that,
we're not changing the
the
speed that
senator
we have to
will.
approve things necessarily, we're just changing some processes that are gonna keep people happy. That's all we're doing, there's just some processes, and honestly, the first one keeps our meetings going faster, I think we're all okay. The
Yeah.
second one is just a matter of, instead of pulling off the agenda, we hear it,
Semantics.
and it's just semantics.
Again, we don't have the situation that we had before.
So I don't see these issues being, right now, I don't see these issues
Yeah.
moving forward,
so I usually, when I write a staff report, you'll notice one of the options is decline to act at this time and give staff direction. So that can be, we're gonna table it, staff, we want some time because we just got this developer just gave us a bunch of new stuff. Has staff analyzed it, right? You're paying us to give you an opinion, and if we haven't seen it, I can't tell you if it's a good change or not.
And we don't even have to dictate what next meeting either, we can just say.
Correct, you can just
the
continue,
future date.
you can continue it to a future, now, what he's talking about putting in is a shot clock,
Yeah.
which I've dealt with in other places.
30 days or something.
It's unreasonable, but if they put that in and you fail to act, it's an automatic approval. That's how he's going to write that.
That's okay, we can
Right.
just deny it, and then that will just be a denial, which.
Well,
is
he
not
actually
good.
said
that'll
he
piss
didn't
him
care if
off
it was
too,
denied,
yeah.
he just wanted action.
Yeah.
Now, he says that, as soon as you deny it,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, then I'll help
Then
break
they-
this.
Then the next.
but
Yeah, the
he
next
doesn't
bill will
work
be
for SLR
No
anymore.
city can ever deny something that's on the agenda.
And I'll say the new process, even though it is tedious for a lot of us to read through all of the information, I think allows us to make better decisions of what to recommend to you.
I love it.
So
True.
going through our agenda reviews, I think Jackie and Nathan have done a really good job of making a decision based on where they think it fits on the agenda, right? So I think it's really helped.
We're gonna
Well,
get some new software that
well,
hopefully will make it a little
Yeah.
faster.
And it
for
seems
directing.
like based on our meeting days, it's more efficient too, cause we haven't been nearly as, they've been
To
more
download,
concise,
yeah.
you know?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Good.
It's been very pleasant.
I would
probably
still
still
say
have
this though, that
I don't know if
I
pleasant is the right word.
I'm-
For us.
I'm seeing some improvement, so I don't wanna not acknowledge the improvement that I've seen. But I still see a lack of a robust recommendation in some of the staff reports, where they'll say, the recommendation will be, choose an option. Or the recommendation will be,
So
that kind of- I'm okay with alternatives, cause I think that's important to understand what other things may have been considered.
Or maybe staff doesn't have a recommendation, it's okay to say, we don't have a recommendation, we just wanna know
And I
your
suppose
opinion.
that's okay too,
Right.
right? But
So one of the things, I'm used to making recommendations, right? I've had councils tell me, we're paying you a lot of money, we want you to tell us what you think.
Yeah.
One of the things we've talked, our staff, we shouldn't try to anticipate what you want us to say.
Yeah.
exactly,
We should make our professional, you may not
And then
like it,
tell us
but we
why.
should tell you,
100%.
if you do this, this is
Give us
why
the
I would say
rationale.
you should do this.
Right.
And we'll work on that, because I think that's the part, when I'm seeing some of the recommendations, is that what you really think? Or is that what you anticipate you think council wants?
Yeah, some of them are hedged, I would say. The recommendation is, you could do option A or option B, that's fine too, right? And it's like, well, which one would you do? That's what I'd like to know.
And typically when you say that, I think you should do this and here's why.
Yes,
Yeah.
But I'll always tell you, if you don't pick what I tell you to do, I don't care.
But
I'm going to try and make it all work. It's just, you ask my opinion,
they'll pay me.
I think you do this, but you all have a different perspective, and that's what I'm trying to
Sure.
convince the staff. You're asking for our perspective based on our experiences and our education.
Profession,
Exactly.
Here's what it is. Now, you're dealing with constituents and things, you bring your own life, and you may say, I think we should do something different. That's hard sometimes for staff. That is really hard because they feel like invalidated. Well, I made this right and you didn't do it. And I've sat through, I don't know how many counseling sessions with staff over the years, telling them it's okay for council to do the one we said, we don't think you should do this because of these things, and then they do it anyways. It's okay. None of these things are so binary that there's only one way it works and every other way fails.
Well,
It's,
it's tough if you're an engineer and you think, we really should be putting 5 inches of stuff. And we're like, no, 3's good enough. Like, you guys are morons. It needs to be 5, that kind of
Might-
thing.
we
I get
might-
it, right?
so I tell them is they just can't say what they think. Right? They may say that, no, you don't understand. But we're also not trying to sell you, because I think that's the part that gets uncomfortable even for staff, is we're not salespeople.
Indian commercial.
We're gonna tell you what it is, and if we give you pros and cons, we're trying to be honest about why we think that's a con. Again, it's coming from our perspective, and if you pick it, like I said, most things you can figure out, and I've had councils give me some rough lemons that were, I think, pretty rotten, but I still had to make something out of them, and no sugar, right? You still make something, you work with staff, and you come up with something
No sugar.
that's going to work, that honors what council has directed you to do. And sometimes it works, tell them, it works out fine, right? It's okay. We thought it should be ABC and they went 1, 2, 3, and it still works out. It's okay. And so you do have to, I will just say that you'll get some hesitancy from staff, and it's
I
the
get it.
emotion of being, it's probably unlike a judge who
You
gets
don't wanna say an
overturned by.
unpopular decision that
Yeah.
council may disagree with. That's hard. I get it.
And so we'll work on that, but again, if it's just our professional opinion, I'll give you a professional opinion. If you don't agree with it, okay. I hope you don't take it personal that I made that thing. I won't take it personal if you don't do it.
It's
It
just
doesn't
hard,
matter.
it's just hard, because sometimes people do, and that's the hard thing, then you have that trickle, and then you have this little culture that's like, we don't care, council never listens to anything we say. That's like, don't wanna get to that point.
And the funny thing is, if that happens, and that's happening, you'll still have a group of people that says, all they ever do is rubber stamp what staff says. And so if we have both those feelings, we're probably doing it pretty well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're not always telling you exactly. Now, I will say that there's, after time, staff does kind of get a sense for what a council wants. And it can't help but color our recommendations as we look at that problem, because we know what you're dealing with, and so we think, okay, this is the, knowing all we know, we think this is the best solution. So you may still get some that feel like, well, I think you're tailoring it to us. It's probably because we've worked with you. We know the pressures you're getting from your constituents, and that will color our opinion, but we work for them too. We work for the citizens, so if that's what they need, that's probably where we go, and it may not even be conscious.
Well, and
I'm
the
just-
hardest part
knowledge
is
and experience that one of
I mean,
them.
we could have 10 items on an agenda, and 4 of them were pretty rough, there's a heavy lifting, a lot of discussion, some vigorous debate and something, and then your item comes up and we're still in the vigorous mode, and somebody catches hell for that. We try not to step on too many toes, but
The emotions and all.
we all gotta be, we all have a certain level of grace we have to offer each other in these processes, right? Like, it's not perfect, but
So does that adjust who's his demands?
I think for us, it will
Acquiesce,
help us with the work sessions. We'll double check that, Paul. We may need to make some amendments to it.
add a few things based on this conversation.
But, and one of the things that we can look at and make sure we put in there is that phrase, you can decline to act and give us further direction, which is, we're gonna continue this. I am not making a final decision on this tonight. I'm not ready. That's perfectly appropriate. And frankly, I think if I were sitting in the staff and they walked in and they changed all the maps and everything, I would be like, I think we should table it until we have a chance to look, cause I don't know what those are. Now, if your staff were involved in creating the maps, they probably should have told you, hey, we're working on some maps, it's not, and they should have told the consultant, if you're still making the maps, let's go a meeting later.
Yeah. That's the only purpose for the practice that was done here, was simply because it lacked transparency and it lacked the ability for us to prepare to make a decision correctly, because we didn't have the proper information at the
Yeah.
front.
we were trying to discourage an incomplete or yet undetermined or we didn't
In
want
those
to have a
cases, there was a
surprise
definite
at the
agenda
town,
being pushed.
Yeah, we were being told there's a deadline for an action, and then we would get the details that night and have to make an action, and that's just bad practice. It was poorly executed several times.
Well, and if you were facing a lawsuit or something like that, that's what closed sessions are for, and you're getting advice from your attorney, and you have to weigh that, right? No lawsuit's ever a slam dunk. It's always kind of a roll of the dice. I've only had attorneys ever say, that's an 80-20, that's the best I've ever gotten.
Well, you'll never get me that high.
I don't know, did you watch the Super Bowl halftime show?
Unless you're sure we're gonna lose.
Yeah, that's
That
true.
might be an
Well, sometimes when you and you just, because it's up in the air, but those are the kinds of things where you may be forced by time, but you should all be aware. We're not doing our jobs if the first time you hear it is like, hey, you have to make this decision, this is a huge issue. I'll say the only time that's gonna be unique are grants that we get like from the county, cause we've had a couple so far that have been, oh yeah, we need this like right now. Well, when is right now? Like yesterday, we're supposed to have turned this in already, and you're like, it says right here, do you have approval from your elected body?
It's a lot of interlocals and MOUs.
Yeah, I was gonna say
that come from other
interlocals we see
organizations.
too.
It's those, I think it was an interlocal actually for an MOU for the grant, it was like, are you kidding me? You send it to us today and need it by tomorrow.
Yeah, sounds
So-
Chase, can I ask one more question? I don't wanna take, I know everybody's kind of wrapping up and I don't wanna keep everybody.
We still have an hour and 20 minutes.
That's
No, we were shooting
Shut
for
your-
8. We were shooting for 8.
Sure. No.
I'm not sitting down again.
Well, you could stand up for a while, cause I'm.
My arm's gone to the
Sorcerer's
sorcerer's
in
anyway.
you can't make me stay.
No, I can't. In the work meeting, I guess one of the reasons I got involved was I wanted, like all this stuff, I get that this is our job, the budget stuff, the roads, I get that that's a big part of our job. I wanna do more than that in this role. And I don't know, like, I'll be honest, tonight, being new to this, flat out shocked me with the direction. I was not expecting this direction tonight, that it would be focused, and I get now why it was, I get it, so I'm not critical that way. But I just came in with all these other ideas, and maybe a work meeting is when I bring these some up, but I just wanna read to you guys what, these were my, I know you say you don't like the word visions, but I believe in vision as far as goals. These are some things that I wanna see. And maybe, and Chase, this is where you said, you can tell me maybe this is a work meeting to bring this stuff up.
Let me maybe define that a bit for you. When we're talking about a plan, right, and accomplishing
Right.
infrastructure goals, what I'm saying is a vision and mission, those things, that's a completely different conversation to me.
Right.
That does absolutely has a place, yes, but it's a different conversation.
And that's where, I guess that's where I pictured tonight going, cause to me, that other stuff we talked about tonight is that's what we do. That's what our job is to do this stuff, and I get prioritizing it. But this is just some of the stuff I wrote down, you guys can tell me if I'm way off base here. And again, we don't have to discuss this tonight, maybe it is a work meeting, but this is the stuff, I wanna have fun with this job too. I don't want this to be to where one of my council members leaning over to me and saying, like, I'm not running for election again because this is hard, right? I want it to be fun, I want to accomplish some stuff and not just react and not just worry about budgets, I want to accomplish some. So this is some things I wrote. I want to increase resident engagement involvement. I want to say, we have 30% voter turnout this year, I want to find a way to 2 years, we're at 40%. What can we do as a council to help get there? Is that resident involvement, is that resident engagement? That's what I wanted to see. Economic development, we talked about how we extend our budget, what can we do as a council to help? We had an interview today with the Herald Journal, me, Tammy, and Sandra talking about how little control sometimes we have, but yet there's still a lot of control we do have. We talk about the culture in the city, I've met with, since that last meeting, I've met with two small businesses in the city. Their biggest worry right now is being blasted on Harriman happenings. That is their biggest worry every day, is they're gonna get blasted on Harriman happenings. We have to fix that culture in this city.
Conversation with somebody last night about getting blasted on Harriman happening.
It's just
Hurts their
true
business.
concern. When our businesses, that's their,
Their business.
Oh, it does, it's
it's bad.
ridiculous.
So that's the stuff I want to, how can we, one, help, cause it helps it helps future businesses. If that negative culture's out here, we've gotta do better. So how can we as a council do that to where then it does increase our budget? Cause I do think plays a part. I think we need more tax, economic, improved relationships with critical partners. We've got to, there's discussions today again, even with, there's critical partners that we haven't been involved with that are making movements around us and we're not involved. So I think as a whole council, it can't just be me, I'm feeling a lot of pressure, I know it's not just me, but we all need to, you and I went back and forth on a couple of emails, there's some critical meetings coming up that, Harriman's a big player, we're not small fries anymore in the city, in the state, in the county. And we need to start throwing our weight around a little bit. How can we do that as a council to become a player with these big names to where the Gail Miller will pick up the phone and call us and want to work with us, not just a neighboring city, so that kind of stuff. My vision for the city, and we talk a lot about this, is I picture us wanting to be a destination city. Where our trails are a destination, where our commercial is a destination, where our job centers are a destination, smart city, where people wanna come here, they can work from home, and a recreation hub of some sort. How can we become that? And a lot of this stuff doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be more capital projects, we talked about these bike trails, these bike parks with these kids, I've kind of brought that up. There's so much we can do that's less money than landscaping and partnerships with others. But that's the kind of stuff I think as a council we can think outside the box to where we can spend that money on roads, that's on other needs. So that's my vision for this city, is a destination in every aspect possible. I want every resident to feel welcome in the city. That's not a political thing, I want every resident to feel welcome here. not that we went through the whole spiel where everybody in high density housing felt like they were the bane of our existence out here. They shouldn't feel that way. Every resident out here should feel welcome. And how can we as a council do that? I wanna see outlets for our youth with all this stuff going on still. How can we create outlets for our youth in the city? Whether it be programming, whether it be partnering with, Sarah at Monarch, she wants to do some, there's a program she wants to help teach in the city.
Not sure, we're looking at a couple, but I was busy with her lately.
Can you read it?
Digital community.
And I'd never heard of it, I'm trying to look into it, and
Is it the good behavior game, or no?
QPR training,
Oh, yeah, we did QPR before, yeah.
but more of that, so she just wants to,
Part of what they were doing.
That's what we did in
but she just
2018.
wants to come off of that as in our community room, she just says, give me a space, advertise it, I'll teach QPR training. We've got somebody and his husband that they wanna teach English classes, he's a Hispanic, that kind of stuff, so how can everybody feel welcome out here? Outlets for the youth, I think there's a lot of youth coming from Venezuela right now that we've talked about, they need to feel welcome, how can we help them with their English classes? Then the last one I want this to continue to be the best city to work for in every department. Keep that culture, there has been a culture. I wanna keep that culture. Whatever we can do as council to support that culture, I want it to where we can bring the best people out here and the people wanna stay. We're not losing people to, other cities, if they go to the private the public sector or the private sector and make more, I get it, but we don't wanna be losing people to other cities. I think we talk about that. So that's, and maybe Chase, that's what I'm saying, is this the kind of stuff that we could work into a work meeting? Cause I feel like sometimes, we've been through these work meetings for a year, watching, it felt like we react, all we were doing is reacting, and we're not ever putting out these new ideas and new concepts and new ways to move forward.
I actually think that would be appropriate to schedule a specific work meeting or an item as any counselor, if you wanna talk about that, say, but because that's a work meeting, it's less structured, you're talking ideas, you're trying to come up with, and then staff making notes. So what you're hitting at is this next step that we need to do here for our strategic, we need to come up with all these ideas. What are we doing? Cause there are some things we are going to do as a city regardless, right? You are going to have law enforcement. Now, to that level of service, that can move.
Right.
But the police are going to show up for emergent crimes.
Right.
Somebody's being attacked, we're gonna send officers, right? That's just the way it's going to be. So we can talk about it, but we don't have to spend, some of those things are given. Had a place, right? We're gonna pick up the trash in our parks, right? We're gonna service those trash cans. Why? Because it just has to happen. But if we're talking about how do we become a recreation hub, I think that's a big picture, and that's probably that big hairy audacious goal that Jim Collins talks about. How do we get there? Let's figure out what are the first things.
Take the steps.
Yeah.
Cause I think a lot of conversations that I've had with the county, that you've had with the county, that we don't get a chance to talk about those much in here, that I think we could talk about. I mean, there's, for example, there's a rack south being talked about out here. The county
Good,
has some
cause
money.
I've been talking to lots of people about it for the last 6 years.
But has it ever been, but like I said, how do we now, as a council,
Engage and start.
engage in the right
Take some
people?
action, yeah.
I look back at how did Lehigh become the Silicon Slopes? I look back, cause their council at one point said, this is what we're right here in the middle, and the state kinda got involved too, go ahead at the
There's
time.
I-15 right there.
And
But they had a vision, the
medium
council had a
wage
vision, and
jobs and
then it
stuff,
just grew legs and went from there, so
So if I may, there's nothing on your list that we haven't talked about before, but the structure's been broken, or there's been fractures, what's the right, a fractured council, right, political obstacles, management agenda, I mean, a lot of those, those structural problems have to get fixed,
Right.
right? So, I mean, there literally isn't anything that you named that hasn't been discussed several times in my time here. But at least for me, what I was trying to say earlier is we need to get the structure and the basic stuff fixed before we can move on to some of the others.
Right.
But just changing some of these seats, right, helps with a lot of those things, cause there is a lot that you can do as a mayor with a supportive council, right? And vice versa.
Well, it's even silly things like meeting with the school district.
Yeah.
It's like,
We've tried to have like further those relationships before, only to have the opposing side of the table undermine them.
So
Right.
so it's good to be in sync.
So it's a fresh start for a lot of those themes.
It's a lot of ground building though, from
On what? Oh,
From that email.
so I suggested to the school board, hey, we have these things, we should have a conversation. They're not interested in having a meeting with the entire council.
Yeah.
We could still do it that way, but I think it's just gonna be Daryl and maybe the two others who cover
I
this
nominate
area.
whoever else.
And so we can do
Great
it
idea.
in small groups or the whole council. They asked me how, in other places, it was both groups. We would host a breakfast or a lunch at some point, maybe once a quarter or twice a year. We would get together with them and it was structured around big picture item. There wasn't like, here's this set item we're talking about. It was, where do you see schools going? What do we do? What's your challenge? How can we help? You know, here's what we're seeing in the city, here's how the schools can help. It was just kind of that high level conversation. I met with the superintendent more often, and again, they just covered our city, so it was easy. But, I think we have a receptive individual over there, and we just need to figure out, are there just two of you wanna do it, or do you want three, or do you wanna rotate through and meet
We
with them?
can't have three, apparently, that, we had that.
You could if you notice it.
We would just notice
Yeah.
it, right? We would just notice it as a public meeting. And I don't think there's
see a
anything
need
wrong with
for
that.
it unless- I mean,
What if we just did myself and rotated through?
they're asking for a decision on
Fine.
something that needs to come back to everyone.
Take whoever's month it is with you,
That's great, and I'm great with that.
you know.
And how often did he wanna meet? I can't remember.
Quarterly.
Quarterly. So, and you could work through, quarterly would be, every counselor could go once a year to it.
Make sure I do Jared's month every.
No, I was just gonna say, make sure it's somebody else.
I don't know whose turn it is right now, but I do know I've been having conversations with both Daryl and Tracy because of the walking path and things like that, trying to get them pushing for the bus. I sent her a copy of the map, cause she's unaware of that. Just said, I want you to understand how somewhat remote the walking trail is gonna be for young kids. They're gonna be cutting through there. I would if I was a kid.
Oh yeah, you don't follow the sea.
So anyway, and it's concerning to us. Anyway, so I've been trying to have some conversations with a few of the ones that I have relationships with, just so that, and that's more item specific and not the big picture kind of thing. But if you're meeting with them on that soon, I'd love to participate in that.
There's great people over there, I mean, we've had some really good conversations.
You hit as a key piece there, it's the relationships, and if I can't emphasize enough, the advantage you have as elected officials when we're up at the legislature or working with the county or the school, those relationships are key. So I encourage you to really try, if you have some, keep working on them. I know Mayor Palmer's jumped right in and trying to establish some relationships with outside groups, and I think that's a key piece, because that's where maybe Harriman has hurt itself in the past, is that we haven't, and there are a whole lot of reasons why we couldn't in the past.
Same with the county, we don't,
Right.
I mean, I know more of them just through other things now, but we don't ever really just kind of meet with the county and kind of understand.
Even if it's just our reps from this
Well, it's-
area.
Well, it's funny, I got a call today from Mayor Hall over in Bluffdale. We both got calls yesterday from a county council member who's running for reelection. And Mayor Hall says, why would I endorse him? He won't even sit, he hasn't even sat down with me.
Yeah.
His first conversation with me is to ask me for his endorsement.
Yeah, that's rough, I've had
So-
lots of conversations with him, so I've no problem.
So he did help us on, but at the same time, this is an opportunity to say, it's time to engage with the county. I mean, we're meeting with the members of the county tomorrow, but not the county council. The county council still, like, I have not heard from Dave Albert, I have not heard from.
I think that's the key for where the elected officials can engage. We can engage with staff, and we generally do. But having the connection, so when a future
It's not-
Olympia Hills comes up,
But it's not so much,
personal.
it's not only connection, it is,
It's a working relationship.
there's an implied authority that comes with the title.
There is.
And so when you show up and it's council member or it's mayor, it means something different to another elected official than a staff member. I get it, and that's where we have to do a better job of leveraging those relationships on behalf of the city, right?
But again, I mean, I just leaned over one day, I'm like, how many times have I said that very thing in here? Right? An issue comes up, like, why didn't you tell us? I mean, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Dave answers me right away, let me know,
Yeah, me too.
right? Or if it's a staff thing, the county's given us, put a Stonewall, well, who are you talking to? Well, their planning department, whatever. Well, do they make the decision? No. Who makes it? The county council. Well, we have several good relationships there. Let me know. I'll make a call. Sherry can make some calls.
I think
There's two or
that's-
three that will answer my call right away.
And I think that's something we haven't taken
Yeah.
as much as we should.
As I was gonna say, as surprising as that may be.
Yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 county council members we can call that I think will return our call every time, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's like that with the school district or anywhere else, but if I have no idea that that's the case, I don't know you need help, right? Or staff.
So I think with our government relations, we're gonna try and do a little bit more where we maybe, the league calls them action items, but maybe we reach out to you and say, hey, we need help with this. And it could be the legislature, it could be more local. It could be that we need to establish relationships with our neighboring cities' councils, so we can have some, maybe a joint meeting to talk about an interface, a road where we
That
interface.
I agree with 100, cause all the mayors I definitely know, but some of the council people, I don't have as much engagement with their individual
When we
council
talk about South Jordan, where Mayor Ramsey's very well-known, very established, but sometimes she doesn't have the authority to make some decisions, where she could have an opinion. So we've gotta get with, I know Don Shelton really well, but beyond that,
Yeah.
I think there needs to be more, and it's not just me, and I know you guys have your relationships, it's how do we keep talking about those at these meetings
Yeah,
to then leverage all those and work together?
well, then I see like Tamara, I obviously know her because we served on a different board together, so when you serve on other
Right.
boards and stuff too, that really helps too, cause then you,
Interact
yeah,
personally.
interact,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think that's where there's
Tish, yeah.
there's a lot of good opportunities for Harriman. I think the way you put it is we need to start, we're not a town of 1,500. We're a big city.
Mhm.
We're moving, we're still only in the 3rd class, but we're moving quickly.
Big goals to be
We do. I really don't like that phraseology, and I don't want you to fix it, we're second class. But I think this is a good opportunity, there's some, to leverage those relationships as we're trying to accomplish something. And I would say the one piece of advice is don't always be the one asking. Sometimes if it's a reciprocal relationship where we can help, you build the goodwill so later when you need something,
I
so.
was just gonna say that sometimes those relationships are, that they've reached out to me for something in the past and I've helped them and like that's how that
Yeah.
works, right?
That's
And we're
absolutely-
always saying thank you, like if something passes, because you push and then it happens, it's really important to reach
Acknowledge
back out and say,
And call them out
Thanks for-
publicly, they
yeah.
appreciate all that,
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're going in a great direction. It's been really nice to have Mayor Palmer up there.
really nice.
Yeah, I don't know how some of those meetings.
Like I said, and the situation is different, like I said before, there were different agendas around this
I
table,
do.
right? I mean,
Right.
it's
not
it's
great.
different.
Well, I mean, I know this is the time, I want to get out of here by 8 o'clock, so I got 1 minute. I'm trying to get, honestly, tonight I am exhausted. I owe you guys more emails about the meetings I've had. I am exhausted, cause
You
it's
should
been,
have gone on
it's
vacation.
nonstop.
Yeah.
And even on vacation, I was on the phone with Cam, with Senator McKay, it
What's the
was.
problem? You'll never catch up, man. Just face it. Get us what you can.
But I just wanna give you a few things, what's going on. We've got meetings scheduled with the county, talked to Mayor Ramsey, we're gonna sit down. I put it out there that we wanna sit down and establish what's gonna happen out here. Is 118th gonna be the boundary? Are they looking at other things, just so we know how to plan for future, we've gotta know that. So that's going on. We reached out to, Rio Tinto, I put that lady that presented last week when I wasn't here.
Yeah, she was awesome.
She's awesome, she's
She
also,
brought these and those.
she's a city council person, she's a
Council,
city
yeah,
council
city coun- yeah.
too, so she gets it, but I think she's gonna help us get in there.
That was great.
South Valley Chamber, met with them, they're different than the Southwest Valley Chamber. I met with them today, they really want us to jump on board, I don't know if that's the right fit
They have for a while.
yet, but they have the big names on board, they've got the Rio Tintos on board with them, they've got another group in with them.
That's the
So
city
we're gonna
part
keep
of
working
it,
with them
whatever.
and try to, but they're trying to create a Southwest coalition type And so I don't know if that's a way they're trying to pull us in a little bit, but the Millers are part of that, and so I don't know. We've got
I think we can be a part of multiple.
I think anytime we get rubbed noses
When that
with
came
those
before,
groups.
there was a lot of fear from the existing chamber that it's somehow gonna displace them or something.
Yeah.
Our comments were, why can't we support?
And we can look at that, so we can look, if we wanna bring that back, we can talk about it.
Maybe that should be almost like a committee assignment, like one of us gets assigned to
each
be
chamber or
part of
something.
each chamber or something like that, you know, so that we can.
We can look at that, I know the
The county
South Valley
You don't have
Chamber
the
is,
South
Valley and
it's
those.
about 3 times the money, so again, we're talking about money, it's a lot of money to join the South Valley Chamber. Where at Southwest Valley, I think they're very beneficial to our local businesses, they do a lot.
Yeah, they do a lot.
But the chamber,
You gotta
Rotary,
put
those
money
things, some of
into
those
it.
are just about connections and keeping.
Yeah.
So the one feels about connection, one almost feels like it's very much taken care of, so it's, so that's what's going on. And then I will, I want council to know this wasn't me out there bringing this up. Darryl Robinson set up, you guys saw he was on the news too. So him and I are gonna start doing a school every other week. Him and I are gonna go work in school every other week. The 3 of us coming out Thursday, we're gonna do Fort Harriman. And then to piggyback that on, we actually reached out to our crossing guards. And Darryl and I are both gonna work with the crossing guard Thursday morning and then Thursday afternoon, just to say thank you to the crossing guards, knowing that will then.
Can we get extra patrols in those areas, just, you know, to
I'll
make
be there. We can't risk.
Yeah,
Lauren
there's
gets hurt.
children's life.
Women and children could die.
I don't think I'm doing it on my own, thank goodness that I'm
Yeah,
not, I'm
you're
not a
an FTO
substitute, I'm gonna
crossing
have a
guard,
real
is what you
person
are.
there with me.
You got the
You know,
FTOs
those
over
might-
there.
Do you have a safety
Have
vest?
you ever
What did you
seen,
get before you?
what's that show,
We'll get them a safety
where the
vest.
CEO steps down and does all the jobs,
Yeah.
that does that?
Yeah.
Undercover boss.
There's gonna be a camera making fun of me doing all this.
I told him that stop
There'll be
sign gets
multiple.
heavy after a
But it'll
while.
be
yeah.
here and that.
There's but I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, my
Switch
son
arms.
told me
Switch arms.
that
Keep
Blackbirds
building up
they
the
had
delts.
17 substitutes today.
So I was in,
17 substitutes.
Silver Crest
today.
for 4 hours a day doing junior achievement stuff, but, yeah.
I would encourage, and I
Just
would,
giving the teachers half hour
and I would
break.
encourage
Yeah,
everybody,
my
you have to go get, I
Yeah.
got fingerprinted today, but
Absolutely possible.
if we do this in the future, I'll reach out. This came pretty fast. This came after I got back and it's been a process to get into the.
You guys should be
Yeah.
hall monitors.
And I think it's kind of a career day, but I've
Dead
totally,
serious.
we'd be
That's
willing to
what
substitute.
my
It's
wife
basically
does.
just whatever the school needs that day to say thank you to our educators. There's been some controversial bills on the Hill this year that educators feel like they're under attack, so I just want our educators out here to know. Again, I think we can have an effect as a council of saying, out here, we appreciate what you do. You know, I don't, you know, so we get, anyways. So that's just a few things, but thank you for what you're doing. This is, thank you for staff, I will say that. This whole thing's been a breath of fresh air. This feels very different right now, so thank you. Everybody in this room is a part of that, I think, so. This has been beneficial. I talked 5 minutes instead of 1.
Wait, before you adjourn, I was wondering, because we had that meeting about the county trailhead, maybe being part of the MDA, all that, and then I've never heard anything since then.
I sent you that email. Essentially, we just administratively told them,
They do.
you don't get to be part of the MDA, you have to work that out with the master developer, and that was it.
Do we know anything where that's at?
The county is,
The county bought the property.
The county
know.
executed the interlocal agreement with the school.
Get rid of the racetrack?
I think it's good. I think it's,
Yeah,
again,
they're-
that's where we
they're
need to
moving
get those
forward.
real.
They are moving as far as we know. I will tell you, it started out as 25 acres, then it was 50 acres. I don't know if it's 50 or 25. It seems kind of all up in the air.
That's where if you've got your county contacts, I don't have those as well yet. I know Martin Jensen really well. It's all over Parks and Rec. But if you've got those county councils, reach out to them and say, where's this at? Where's the try it out? That's the kind of stuff I can use from you guys. I can't
All
be
the
the one.
parking that they have there and so.
I've got one other thing, so I meeting with Craig White tomorrow morning for an
That's
hour
great
and a
for
half.
egress, egress.
Sewer, district area. I met with the guys today in our house, engineering and sewer department, and public works, got our punch list items, but, anything else broad spectrum that you guys have seen that we need from the sewer board or that we wanna?
Just make sure it keeps flowing down.
Make sure it goes out.
Keep me posted. That's
There
something new to me.
is,
so I
there's
mean-
one thing that you suggest I just wanna touch on again, is that, this idea of a PR campaign or a messaging, a phrase, something, branding that suggests, Harriman's open for business, Harriman's different than what you might think.
Can we get
You
the
know,
Yeti going on a
If this is
shopping
what
spree or something?
show Little House on the Prairie and that's what people think Harriman is, and then say, this is what Harriman really is, it's things like that are just putting in people's minds, Harriman is where it's happening, fastest growing city in the United States, here's,
World's best coffee
yeah,
campaign,
right, all that kind of stuff, right? Just something I think,
Do we have a
Yes.
Congratulations, you haven't seen Elf? Elf, he said, you
Right.
did it.
No, I just didn't know that. I just
but I think it's,
I saw
well, they do
the
coffee
coffee
shop.
I really think that's gotta be a part of our economic development, it's tied into our economic development plan, right?
And they're just
That is what
sweet as
it should be, it needs to
They're
be,
so sweet.
we need to be proactive about that.
Nathan, how can we make that a priority too, without it being
Which
too
one?
much money, a
Better.
PR
It's
campaign?
gotta be better.
I
Made us do it.
think we just start talking about it and figure it out.
What if we get the high school members out, the Mountain
We
Ridge?
have an intern
I-
in the high school now.
I know that the business person I was talking to yesterday, that's who's trying to get his high school people
Not the
to reply on, they don't use Facebook, they're trying to.
No,
Probably
Instagram,
Instagrams, but the Harriman happening, so how do you combat when somebody says something negative about your business? When it's not true or it's just not a hundred
That's
percent.
Outlandish,
cute
yeah.
because it's important, you know what,
Is
even
reading that, yeah.
even
So
negative
good.
is advertising. So it's like if you can spin it, right? So that's the deal, is if they're being mentioned on Harriman Happening, if they can jump on that and have.
A lot of the times they
people
don't
spin that.
reply properly,
But
cause
it
it's
would
all
be, it would be so
bigger
good though to have somebody
slice.
come in and say,
Yeah,
like one of us could even say, hey, I went and talked with the manager today. They were really appreciative of the feedback. And for today only, everybody gets a free drink with their order, just, or something, right? Like, just so you're totally turning it around and saying, no,
We're listening.
don't stay away from here.
Yeah.
Here's a reason you need to be visiting this business today, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I
Is
don't understand
that-
why people spend the effort to try, if you don't wanna go there, just.
Because,
Right?
Well, and it's sad to see
Because
negative,
reason people
but
say,
then
I'm
you
leaving
don't see
Facebook.
positive.
Broadcast
That's
or
what
Well-
social media is, it's just
Right,
the
it's their
rest
vomit.
Yeah.
they don't.
We can work on that, we'll talk,
People care what I think.
Yeah.
we did it,
People
it's
care.
usually called reputation management.
okay, yeah,
It's
yeah.
in my trick,
Yeah,
how we
yeah.
do it.
Reading.
I like your idea, maybe we talk.
I think I think they might throw some resources at us.
Start doing our own TikTok.
Well, the Yeti's got a TikTok, but. it's
I
not
know, we
very
talked
popular.
about it, the Yeti was gonna do a TikTok, it was.
TikTok works. It's just weird, there's no real algorithm, it's all.
We have to get
A second. Are we motioned? Yeah.
I think you're good.
Hey,
I'd
all in
say-
favor?
Oh, now they're not gonna-
What?
All in
Favor.
favor? Aye.
Motion and,
I
motion and
think-
seconded to end.
Thanks, Jared.
I'm relieved.
Hey, chief, what's up with this